across the board. And inflation fears are becoming more pronounced, with some economists warning a recession may be looming. CBC Scott Peterson is here now following everything that's happening. So Scott, break this down for us in layman's terms. What are you perceiving as you look at these markets? I think it's the third straight trading day that we've seen in this kind of slump. Also differentiate that bear and bull market for us.
Yeah, just starting with that, a bull market is when the market's gone from some level to a 20% pop from that. That's a bear market. That's enthusiasm. A bull market. A bear market is when it's down 20% from a recent peak. So a couple of months ago, we had the S&P 500 hitting certain levels. It is now down below that about 22%. So we are now officially in a bear market territory, and a lot of trading programs calculate that, and that could bring more buying, that could bring a ceiling, it could bring a floor. But let's take a look at a live look at what we were just looking at, Natasha, to just reiterate how much red is out there. That's over 400 points to the downside, and this is on top of market meltdown last week that saw $9.5 trillion wiped out from market value around the world whatsoever. There's another element here, is the fear index. This is a VIX index that's tracked, and these markets are just quite frankly afraid that this fear index has not been this high going back since the beginning of the pandemic. So it shows you how much confusion, how much worry there is in these markets. And I've seen quite a few of these market corrections. This harkens back to 2008 or even to 1987 as far as the severity. There's $9.5 trillion lost. And this is also unusual in the sense that this is all coming down to one person, and that's Donald Trump, the U.S. president, making this. So the markets are very confused because at any given time, unlike the pandemic, unlike the financial crisis back in 2008, which we were embroiled in, this could change by the whim of a single person. So we've never seen anything like this. This is unprecedented in these markets. And it's not just confined to North America. And there you see another 1,000-plus plummet for the Dow Jones. And let's get to the European markets as well, because North America is not alone here. We're seeing London down about 4.4. Frankfurt, the car makers, all the German car makers to the downside. The Paris CAC 40 down 4.4%. We're also seeing a lot of the financial companies because of the prospect if these markets do hit a recession, lenders could stop lending, and that would hit bank profits very severely as well. We're also looking at the price of oil. We're seeing that if there is going to be a recession, less economic activity, the price of oil comes down yet again. It's now flirting with about $60 a barrel. Those are lows that we haven't seen in 4 years. Copper plummeted as well. That's a building material, a good indicator. And we're hearing more pushback now from the business community that used to be, well, that still are on Donald Trump's side, but that's a tricky thing to do. We're hearing from JP Morgan, there's a 60% chance of a recession. Goldman Sachs came out this morning saying they think there's a 45% chance. And also Jamie Dimon, who's the head of JP Morgan, had this to say in a statement to Donald Trump, saying that the recent tariffs will likely increase inflation and are causing many to consider a great probability of a recession. These significant and somewhat unprecedented forces cause us to remain very cautious. Now, that's a very cautious language. Nobody wants to upset the U.S. president who is basically controlling these markets, but the markets are pushing back as well. They're saying they do not see a plan here, and we've heard from Truth Social with the president saying things in all capitals. There is no inflation, and he's pressuring Jerome Powell, the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman, to lower rates as soon as next week. But these markets are not buying it. They're simply saying, if there is a plan, they do not see the plan, or the plan doesn't make sense to them. And so that's why we're hearing these alarms and this red markets day after day, now for a third severe day to the downside since that big tariff announcement back Wednesday. Just
very briefly, Scott, because this information can be so overwhelming, it can kind of numb people out. You mentioned a couple of times $9.5 trillion gone. People think markets go up, markets go down, but this means it's gone. There is no recovering that $9.5 trillion. Is that right?
Well, but that's a paper loss. I mean, if people hold on, they could make it back. I mean, if that's next year or 2 years down the road. But the problem being is a lot of these are smaller investors. They're looking at their 401ks or their retirement savings here in Canada. They don't have the luxury of sitting around for a couple of years. A lot of people may be in margin calls. They have to sell. So these are very real losses. And the unfortunate thing is they hurt the poorest of investors and not the big institutional investors.
Right. The banks are going to make their money. Scott Peterson, thanks so much for that.
Thanks, Tasha.
Forgive me. The market fears we saw there with Scott are mirrored in the deep concern from Canada's federal campaign trail. At the beginning of the third week, Liberal and Conservative leaders are both in British Columbia. The softwood lumber industry that is so important to that province now faces duties that will more than double, from around 14.5% to over 34%. CBC's Kate McKenna is in our Parliamentary Bureau in Ottawa tracking these developments. Kate, tell us more about what the leaders are up to today.
Well, British Columbia is shaping up to be one of the most interesting provinces to watch. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and Liberal leader Mark Carney are both starting their days there today. Pierre Poilievre is in Tariffs, which is an area that has been held by the NDP for a very long time, about 20 years. And he is making an announcement today for what he's calling a one-stop shop, a one-and-done environmental review for energy products or energy projects, which has been part of his message that he says, you know, Canada needs to build more energy projects in order to be more resilient in the face of Donald Trump's tariff threats. One former chief of staff to Stephen Harper says it's a sign of momentum that Pierre Poilievre is on the offensive in British Columbia.
I think it's telling that Mr. Poilievre's heading up to Terrace today. That's a part of of British Columbia where the Conservatives have had difficulty for the last 20 years. So if he thinks that somehow that riding is in play, that would be a long time work of pickup to bring that riding back. In the interior of British Columbia, in the southern interior of British Columbia, of course, Mr. Poilievre was up and down the valley from Kelowna to Osoyoos this weekend. You can never take any of those ridings for granted, and given the growth, there's 3 or 4 ridings at play there.
That riding is also an area where there is a lot of forestry. We're talking about softwood lumber tariffs and also the possibility of an LNG plant being built there. And of course, Pierre Poilievre's announcement today is on energy. So we can perhaps expect those 2 subjects to come up when he speaks later today. And now looking at Mark Carney, who is starting his day in Victoria. He's set to meet with Premier David Eby sometime this morning. And he will also probably be talking about those tariffs, but we do have some of what he's set to announce later today. Their economic policies very much in line with his overall message on being the right guy to defend against Donald Trump's tariffs. So specifically, he's going to reduce or protect retirement savings by reducing the minimum amount that must be withdrawn from a registered retirement income fund by 25% for 1 year and increase the guaranteed income supplement by 5% for 1 year. So that's part of what he's going to announce today. It's unclear if that will be everything he announces. He's set to go to Vancouver this evening for a rally, and we know that he's set to be in the western part of the country this week. It's not an area he had visited previous to this week as he looks to pick up seats in both British Columbia and perhaps in Alberta. Finally, the NDP started their day in Toronto. Jagmeet Singh in the last hour was speaking with HBC workers. Yves-François Blanchet of the Bloc Quebecois, obviously still in Quebec, and co-leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May, is in Guelph today.
McKenna in Ottawa. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
Ontario's government is promising new financial help for workers and businesses to help them weather the economic storm from Donald Trump's tariffs. Now, the province says it will provide about $11 billion in relief and support. That includes a 6-month deferral on some taxes worth about $9 billion for businesses to keep workers employed. It's also issuing a $2 billion rebate for eligible businesses through the Workplace Safety Insurance Board. That's also to keep people on the job. Now, this is day 1 of a 2-week shutdown and layoff at the Stellantis assembly plant in Windsor, Ontario, because of Trump's auto tariffs. And stay tuned to CBC News Network, because just in a few moments, we're going to be speaking to Jason Mercier. He's a longtime employee of that Stellantis plant. This is his first day where he's off the job, so we're going to talk to him about how he and his family and his colleagues are doing. That's coming up in a few moments. But now let's talk about the White House, because you know they are very likely watching the market turbulence and confusion closely this hour. For that, we turn to CBC's Katie Nicholson, joining us from Washington. Katie, some well-known bankers and hedge fund managers are publicly calling on the president to pause these tariffs. Now, one of them is investor Bill Ackman. He's a longtime ally of Trump, but he took to social media on the weekend with a strong message for the president. Walk us through all of that.
Yeah, really important to underscore. Bill Ackman, he's a hedge fund billionaire. He is a MAGA supporter. So it really is notable that he went on X yesterday to urge the president to put this 90-day pause on tariffs. Here's a little of what he posted. It's a very long post, so I'm just pulling a little bit of it here. The president has an opportunity to call a 90-day timeout, negotiate and resolve unfair, asymmetric tariff deals and induce trillions of dollars of new investments in our country. If, on the other hand, on April 9th, we launch economic nuclear war on every country in the world, business investments will grind to a halt. The president has an opportunity to call this 90-day timeout, negotiate and resolve unfair asymmetric tariff deals, and induce trillions of dollars of new investment in our country. So really, he's trying to push this this sort of tariff, a nightmare, essentially, that the economists are seeing, and sort of drawing these parallels between what could happen on Wednesday and some sort of nuclear winter. Not surprisingly, the White House is pushing back against those comments. A big part of their messaging throughout the weekend was, oh, this is all being overblown by the media. But this is not the media. This is a mega supporting hedge fund billionaire, right? So a little bit harder to discount. Nonetheless, the White House's National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett was out this morning on Fox and Friends, really trying to push back specifically against those words from Ackman. Here's Hassett.
Urge everyone, especially Bill, to ease off the rhetoric a little bit. A lot of us at the White House think that these economic responses are exaggerated by critics. Even if you think that there will be some negative effect from the trade side, that's still a small share of GDP. And so the idea that it's going to be a nuclear winter or something like that is completely irresponsible rhetoric.
Now, the president spent much of the weekend out playing golf before he returned to D.C. last night on Air Force One. And it was on Air Force One that he revived that analogy again before reporters that he used last week. This whole conceit that the tariffs are some sort of a necessary medical intervention into the American economy. So this was his response when he was asked if there's any kind of threshold for how much pain he is willing to allow the market to endure.
I think your question is so stupid. I mean, I think it's I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. And we have such a horrible, we have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen. They took our businesses, they took our money, they took our jobs, they moved it to Mexico, they moved it to Canada, they moved a lot of it to China.
This morning, he's been busy on Truth Social again, posting the United States has a chance to do something that should have been done decades ago. Don't be weak. Don't be stupid. Don't be a panican, a new party based on weak and stupid people. Be strong, courageous, and patient, and greatness will be the result. So again, pushing back on all of that messaging and trying to really convince the American people to trust in his vision.
Katie, there's been quite a bit of discussion over the past few days that now President Trump has issued these individualized sets of tariffs on hundreds or almost 200 countries. What does this mean for individual relationships, particularly for countries that are normally close allies of the United States? We might get a glimpse into that today with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu being in Washington. So what are you watching for there?
Yeah, so, I mean, Netanyahu met with the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, yesterday. That was ahead of any sit-down today with the president. So the U.S. is Israel's largest single trading partner. So this 17% tariff on the table, that is a big deal. The Times of Israel says that in 2024, just last year, the U.S. imported more than $13.5 billion worth of goods from Israel. So there's a lot of sectors that are very nervous within Israel, in the biotech, plastics, metals, chemicals, that sort of thing. And obviously, tariffs won't be the only thing that will be under discussion this afternoon. They are expected to talk about Gaza, the hostage crisis, about Iran, Israel's tensions with Turkey. But It will be interesting to see how tariffs figure into those discussions and whether they give the U.S. any leverage in its agenda. And one other thing I would say, Natasha, is that we should be looking also to Congress this week for some more pushback and dissent. There is, of course, that bipartisan bill in the Senate to sort of wrestle back some of the control over tariffs from the White House. And that has a companion bill in the House, interestingly enough, that was put forward by a Republican from Nebraska. Here is that representative, Don Bacon.
If we continue to see the stock market go a certain direction, or if we see inflation or unemployment shift in a bad way, I think then this bill becomes a very viable bill. So it will not pass tomorrow or maybe in the next couple of weeks, but this will be in the queue that we can use. And it's time that Congress restores its authorities here.
So a lot of eyes right now on the middle of the House Republican Conference and the Senate Republican Conference, and really how many people start to speak out and sort of share their doubts about the trade war. And it's notable, too, that there are pro-Trump voices like Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who over on the weekend in a podcast started to really pipe up, saying that he feared that this issue could lead to a midterm bloodbath if these tariffs lead to a recession.
CBC's Katie Nicholson in Washington. Thank you, Katie. And as Katie just mentioned, the Israeli Prime Minister's meetings in Washington today will likely also have to deal with that ongoing war in Gaza. Palestinian medics say Israeli airstrikes today hit tents that were housing journalists. They say at least 2 people were killed. CBC's Crystal Gamansing is watching that story for us from London, and she joins us now live. Crystal, what more can you tell us about the latest strike?
Well, Natasha, that strike in Khan Yunis resulted in some pretty graphic images being shared. Palestinian journalists say it happened at about 3 o'clock in the morning local time. They were woken up to the sound of an explosion that hit the area around the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis. They say that they were targeted. Now, at this point, we understand 1 journalist was killed, several others were wounded. The Palestinian Journalists Syndicate is saying that Israeli officials need to adhere to international law, that journalists are protected under international law, but that is not happening. The syndicate has named that journalist as Helmi Al-Fakawi with the Palestinian Today TV. However, Israeli officials, including the IDF and Shin Bet, the National Security Agency of Israel, has issued a statement on Telegram. They named a different individual, saying that that person was hit in the strike, that individual was a Hamas terrorist, took part in the Hamas-led attacks of October 7th. We have no reason to explain the different names at this point. We can say that the syndicate is naming the killed journalist as Helmi Al-Fakawi as a part of the Palestinian Today TV outlet. They're also saying that more than 200 Palestinian journalists have been killed so far. We're also hearing from the president of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. He is calling on the international community to hold Israel to account. He says that it needs to explain what happened on March 23rd. And that day in southern Gaza, there was an emergency vehicle's convoy that came under attack. 15 people were killed. Israel originally said that they didn't know it was an emergency services vehicle convoy, that lights weren't flashing. They weren't able to determine who those individuals were approaching. Video has surfaced showing that that is not the case. And now we have the president of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society demanding a full and independent international investigation. He wants to know why Israel changed its story after that video surfaced and why those individuals were buried, why they hid those ambulances in the fire truck after the incident. So a lot of calls for answers and justice today out of Gaza, Natasha.
CBC's Crystal Gamansing in London. Thank you, Crystal. Still ahead, Canadians living abroad have been sending us questions about how to vote in the upcoming federal election. But we've got some answers for you coming up right here on CBC News Network. Automaker Stellantis is shutting down its assembly plant in Windsor, Ontario for the next 2 weeks, largely because of those hefty new U.S. tariffs on imported vehicles. Operations right now are set to resume the week of April the 21st. Our next guest is one of the employees feeling the impact of the Stellantis plant's temporary shutdown. Jason Mercier joins us now from Belle River, Ontario. Jason, thanks so much for making time for us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jason, it's day one, the first day of this seemingly 2-week plant shutdown. How are you feeling?
A little uneasy, to be honest with you. I've never really felt this exact feeling before, where we're laid off and, not really sure about our future. So,
how long have you been working there?
I've been there for 25 years.
Long time. And I understand it's not just yourself, your wife also works there. So what kind of pressure is this putting on you guys?
This has had a great impact on our household here. Again, it's only the first day, but we understand clearly what this all means. We've been through it before. In 2000, we lost the auto pact. So we lost one of the plants, plant 6, where we used to work, the big van plant. So we faced that layoff. That took about a year to get through. And then in 2008, the economic downturn, we were laid off again for quite some time. So in our industry, we deal with layoffs quite often, unfortunately. It's the market, and sometimes it's the lack of government, regulations that put us down.
But this one feels different, I would think, because it's really up to one person.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how this even happens, how we're so vulnerable as Canadians that one person can come in and wave his wand and put us all down like this. I think it's a test of time. I think that we've made some large mistakes politically in the last couple decades. I've heard some news today that the Liberals are putting forward a consultation process with the World Trade Organization to deal with these tariffs. Mm-hmm. So they've started the ball rolling. I just think it's too little, too late, unfortunately.
So if you're saying there's large mistakes that have been made in the past 2 decades, what are those mistakes? What should Canada have done?
Well, we should have kept our auto pact. We should have snubbed the World Trade Organization at the time. Let's talk about the World Trade Organization, because they're the reason why this is all happening. The World Trade Organization is a group of members of our society made up of government and corporate elites. They decide all of a sudden that they are the master trade organization, and everybody that wants to trade in the world has to go through them and apply to their rules. When the World Trade Organization was invented back in 1999, I believe it was, the first thing they did was declare our auto pact illegal because it gave Canadians an advantage. And what the auto pact simply stated is if you wanted to sell vehicles in our country, then you had to build vehicles in our country. That created tons of work and tons of plants and tons of jobs. And when it was created in the late 60s, so when we lost it in 2001, we lost over 200,000 manufacturing jobs here in Ontario alone that all went to the deep south right to work states. And the government of Mexico paid billions of dollars to move all these plants down to Mexico. They created a whole transit system for the workers. This is what corporations did, was they shopped out the cheapest labor in the entire world. And so, here we are back full circle again. And now we want these jobs back in Canada. And now the government's, slowly getting off their hands and starting to make, progress. But it's unfortunate that it's too little too late for me.
I feel like for a lot of people watching, they can't relate, right? They don't understand the impact. Oh, it's a 2-week shutdown. What does this mean? You and your wife have worked there for a while. Hopefully, presumably, you've built up some equity. You're okay for 2 weeks. Talk to me about some of the younger employees, people who may not be as financially stable as you guys.
Yeah, you're right. We've been through this before. We've saved money. We know how to deal with some of these things. Again, we don't know how long it's going to be, so that's going to be the telltale sign. For us, we tighten our belts. We can't afford to go out anymore. We can't afford to do a lot of things when we're laid off, right? It's just the very basics, and we know that. We've been through it before. We were about to make a big, large purchase, a vehicle, and we're not going to be doing that anytime soon now. So, that we're just one family amongst many, many, many. There's so many young families that have just recently been hired. My plan alone, and they don't have the same benefit packages that we have. And the reality is unemployment doesn't pay well. not for when you maybe just got a new car or just got a new house or starting a young family. So we've been there. We know how that feels. And I feel for our young workers. I really do. And, we're talking about 7 spin-off jobs for every auto job. So there's a lot of our community right now in Windsor, Essex, that are going to suffer, and when we talk about suffer, not just the families that are laid off, but the rest of the community where people aren't going out, they're not spending money, so that it's going to be, it's going to grow exponentially. And that's the reality of it.
Jason, you know that some people might be watching this and they'll say, look, this is just what progress means. Sometimes industries change, sometimes whole industries disappear. Why can't you guys adapt? And if you need to, maybe look for other work if the auto industry is failing you.
Oh, that would be great. If there was tons of job openings, I'm sure a lot of people would jump ship. But the reality is when the auto plant shuts down, let's say it shuts down, the reality is there is no jobs in our community, right? Our unemployment rate is quite high here in Windsor. And, that's the challenge. Who's going to hire a 25-year factory worker that's 50 years old? I can't imagine anybody. Realistically, let's be honest about that, so that's the challenge. And do these young families that are laid off, do they start looking for work too, or do they hold out hope? It's a tough choice. It's a tough challenge. And, I just want to make note that, we've got local politicians, whether they be municipal, provincial, or federal, they're not speaking out. I have heard nothing from my municipal leaders, but it's going to affect municipal. We spend money in our communities. So these municipal leaders, they need to step up and start saying, what they're going to do for our workers too, our communities in general.
Jason, I want to thank you for your time. I hope the next 2 weeks aren't too painful, and it is only 2 weeks. Let's hope. Thank you again.
Yeah, I really want to believe that it's only going to be 2 weeks, but the reality is we're just not sure. That's the real reality that we face. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye.
federal election is now into its third week of the campaign. And as it gets closer, many Canadians are taking a closer look at how they can vote. And some of them are either located outside of the country or they're going to be traveling overseas at the time. We've been getting a number of questions from viewers about that type of voting process. Marianne Domain is here to answer some of those questions. So Marianne, let's start with Nancy Phillips's first question. She says, how can I vote online? I will be out of the country for the advance polls, and on voting day, I really want to vote.
You know, a lot of people have been asking, can I vote online? Can I vote by email? And the short answer to that is no, you can't. According to Elections Canada, if you're going to be out of the country, like our viewer who has written into our newsroom, you have to vote by mail, and there is a process to do that. You first have to apply, and you can either apply online or by mail, or you can go to one of the Elections Canada offices across the country before you go on your vacation, or you can try to plan ahead of time if that's still a possibility for you. Either way, you have to provide proof of your identification as well as your address, and you have to do that even if you're already a registered voter, and you have to also provide the address of where you want that special ballot kit to be delivered to. Keep in mind there is a deadline here because you have to have this application process complete by April 22nd, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and if you want to ensure that your vote is counted, you have to make sure that it is back in the hands of Elections Canada by voting day. That is, of course, April 28th, and it has to be here by 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So keep that timeline in mind. Keep in mind how long it may take for that airmail to get your ballot back here in the country. An important thing to note, Natasha, is if you decide to apply for the mail-in ballot, you can't change your mind. That's according to Elections Canada. You have to commit to that decision. You can't then say, never mind, I actually want to vote at the advance polls or in person on Election Day. You've got to stick to the mail-in ballot.
Okay. Well, that's for people who are on the move, you know, these jet setters on their vacations. What about folks who just live in other countries but are Canadian citizens?
Yes, so if you're a Canadian citizen living abroad, you also have to mail in your ballot, and you also have to apply. And again, you can do that either online or by fax. What's different in this process, though, is you can actually pick up your application from either a Canadian consulate, many of them are doing this, as well as a Canadian embassy or a high commission. They can actually print out that application form for you. What they can't do is process that application, and they do not have any of those special ballot kits to give you. They can just give you the form. You then have to mail it in and follow that same guideline. It has to be applied for and completed by April 22nd, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure it's back in the hands of Election Canada by Election Day. Important to note that if you are here, if you're not leaving the country, if you don't live abroad, you can, of course, vote in person on Election Day, April 28th. That information about your polling station is on your voter information card. You can actually vote early between now and April 22nd at one of the many Elections Canada offices across the country. And then there's, of course, Natasha, the advanced polling days. Those are between April 18th and April 21st.
Really helpful. Thanks so much, Marianne.
You're welcome.
is another look at the markets at the start of the new week. As they react to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, there is fear that tariff-induced inflation will continue to rise, and some economists are warning about the possibility of a recession. For more on this, we are joined now by Jared Bernstein. He served as the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors under former U.S. President Joe Biden. Mr. Bernstein, really great to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for making time.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Mr. Bernstein, I mean, it's 3 days in a row, it's deep red, and it's really scary. So break it down for us lay people. When you look at these numbers, when you see where the markets are globally, what are we to make of this?
Well, when you see this kind of a sell-off, and global is a key word here, you know that something's going on that's unpopular with lots of different types of people. I mean, here in this country, you have, unless you're paid to believe otherwise, so meaning you're not a member of the Trump administration, you're very unhappy with this trade war that basically one guy, the president of the United States, is commandeering. Business investors, the markets are clear on this, are very spooked by what's going on. Consumers are nervous for exactly the reason you said. They're already unhappy with high prices, and these tariffs will make them even higher. Businesses, which, by the way, import a lot of inputs into their production process, even here in the US, and I know you in Canada know this very well, the North American auto production chain is exactly that. US, Mexico, Canada, all working together. So this is a threat to so many sectors, which is why the pain is so pervasive.
Let's talk about the man who's behind the tariffs, President Trump. Now, we're getting specific kinds of messaging from him on Air Force One. Yesterday, he was answering a reporter's question and said, sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. It's not really clear what this medicine is or what exactly we're sick with, but okay. And then today he's posted on Truth Social, oil prices are down, interest rates are down, the slow-moving Fed should cut rates. Is your understanding that he's trying to do this intentionally, that he wants there to be a shift? Is it appropriate for the president to take such a gamble just to push forward a specific economic policy?
A lot to unpack there, and it involves me getting inside Trump's head, which I don't want to do because I might not ever get out. Look, I think part of what you said, I might push back on a little. We don't know what the medicine is. In fact, unfortunately, we know what the medicine is. It's a set of global tariffs that have been construed in such a way that is really thoughtless and not at all connected to anything any economist would recognize. There's no empirical evidence that this medicine will help. And the second part of your question is exactly on point. Help with what? What's the problem? It is easy to forget at this point that Donald Trump inherited a very strong economy. Prices were coming back down, or say inflation was coming back down. GDP growth was strong. The labor market was solid. So the kind of what they're fixing here, it's all in Donald Trump's head. That really is a key here. He and his team have created an alternate reality where trade deficits are a scorecard, where everyone is ripping us off, even if they're selling us things that we want to buy, and where punishment must be meted out. So until they're willing to kind of bend their alternate reality to the actual reality, which is exactly what the markets are responding to, I think we're going to just be looking at more of this kind of volatility and disruption.
The president has had to deal with some pushback from people who have normally been on side. So we've heard from JP Morgan Chase chief, who's been warning the president that tariffs are going to lead to a rise in prices and possibly tip the global economy into a recession. And as we've been talking about, weaken the United States standing in the world. Is that accurate?
It is very much accurate, and you're getting into something that I think is important here. I referenced it a minute ago. President Trump, and I guess some of his staff who maybe agree with him or at least are paid to do so, they are very isolated. They are on their own. I can't remember seeing an issue that was so vastly unpopular, consumers, producers, businesses, markets, you would be very hard pressed to find anyone who thinks this is a good idea. Again, they're holed up in their alternative reality. I compared it to the Dickens character of Miss Havisham over the weekend, someone who's living in the past and it refuses to come out and look around and see what's going on. Now, we got a bit of a suggestion this morning that maybe there was some reality creaking in from Kevin Hassett, one of their economic advisors. And believe it or not, the market immediately snapped into positive territory. Then the White House said, no, that's fake news, and it snapped right back into negative. So they are extremely isolated with very few friends on this issue, as they should be, because it's so globally destructive.
And they may be isolated, but the impact, again and again, we keep saying, is so global, can be so deeply wounding to so many. So I wonder, is it just a matter of removing the tariffs and everything goes back to normal? Or what will it take to get the markets to stabilize again?
Well, I think for the markets to stabilize, removing the tariffs, maybe even just removing the reciprocal part of the tariffs would help a lot. I mean, again, when one of their representatives said, maybe we'll have a pause for a month and a half, the market snapped immediately back into positive territory. So I actually think that the markets could at least partially snap back if they would recant this craziness. I think the deeper problem, Natasha, is that every sector you can think of, global leaders, business persons, consumers, are recognizing that the largest economy in the world, the $30 trillion U.S. economy, is essentially being driven down the road 120 miles an hour by people who, are really pretty deeply incompetent. And I don't know how you repair that. So I think that this, is maybe a bit of a wake-up call for what we're going through here.
Jared Bernstein, really great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
My pleasure.
The federal election is about to hit another significant marker, the deadline for candidate nominations. And it appears all of the major parties are set to have a full slate ahead of the 2 p.m. local cutoff. Now, that means we're getting a better idea of the individual battleground ridings. 2 of them are in Edmonton, where vote splitting between some very high-profile candidates could be a huge factor. Sam Sampson is there.
At Rogue Wave Coffee, it's party in the front, beans in the back. The 10-year-old company ships its coffee around the world and pours it out in a central Edmonton storefront. Part owner Dave LaVille wants an MP who can help his business and neighborhood thrive.
Candidates that support local organizations, and if they are voted in, that they really will push hard to see this riding improve.
Around here, every vote counts.
It is exciting to be in a riding where all 3 parties have a chance of winning.
Edmonton Centre has historically flipped between the Liberals and the Conservatives. The Liberals won the riding in 2021 with a 1.3 margin of victory. This race is tight, and now it's wide open. Incumbent Randy Boissonnault, a former cabinet minister, is not running again after last year's controversy over his shifting Indigenous heritage and questionable business dealings. Now, new Liberal candidate lawyer Eleanor Olszewski and Conservative Saeed Ahmed, a director in Alberta's health department, are squaring off. But this political scientist says the NDP's Tricia Estabrooks makes things interesting, with name recognition as a former CBC reporter turned school trustee.
There's probably some likelihood that there will be vote splitting that'll benefit the Conservatives here.
The NDP comfortably won Edmonton Strathcona last time and wants to keep the riding of Edmonton-Griesbach, where they narrowly beat out the Conservatives in 2021. A riding where some voters don't yet seem to be swayed.
I have voted Conservative, Liberal, NDP, everything but Green, and I've lost faith in the whole system.
I'm thinking about voting strategically, just like I have a certain party I don't like and I would prefer them not to get seats.
An Edmonton win means Western representation for the Liberals. For the NDP, these ridings could help secure official party status. And for the Conservatives, a win around here means Northern Alberta could prove true to blue. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
And Alberta is also going to be the focus tonight and tomorrow night for the National. Adrian Arsenault will host the program from Medicine Hat as part of a roadshow series connecting with local voters. You can watch that at 9 p.m. Eastern on CBC News Network, 10 p.m. local on CBC TV or 10:30 in Newfoundland. And we'll be back in just a moment. All right, friends, let's go to Toronto for a campaign announcement by NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. He's just being introduced by other New Democrats in the area. Let's listen.
To have leaders who understand the urgency of this crisis and are ready to fight for real solutions. For too long, Housing has been treated as a way for investors to get rich, not as the human right that it should be. It's everyday people who are paying the price, but it doesn't have to be this way. It is now my pleasure to introduce someone who has never stopped fighting for everyday people, renters, workers, and families, right across this country. Please join me in welcoming the leader of Canada's New Democrats, Jagmeet Singh.
Hey, thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot for being here. It means a lot. It's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Norm, for the introduction, and I am so proud to have so many incredible candidates here representing the candidates in Toronto. If you live in Toronto and you want someone that's going to fight for you, vote for these candidates behind me. These are fighters for you. We know that, as Norm mentioned, a lot of folks are just really struggling to find a place they can afford. People are looking around and saying there's nowhere for me to rent, and buying seems just out of reach, like just impossible to do. And in this time, we also know people are feeling the stress and worry of Donald Trump and the attacks on our country and how that's impacting them, and it makes them even more worried about the future, even more uncertain about what's going to happen. So in all of this, I want you to know New Democrats are going to fight to make sure you can find a home that you can afford. Our plan is to build 3 million homes in the next 5 years. Not just build those homes, but build homes that people can actually afford. We're going to lay out the plan to do that. And as we laid out yesterday, all of this money that we're talking about is going to come with a condition that's going to require that municipalities and provinces put in place laws like rent control, banning fixed-term leases, banning rent evictions and dem-evictions, empowering tenant unions to negotiate with landlords. We want to ensure that all the money we're going to talk about today is tied to conditions to make sure that these homes are affordable. So to achieve the 3 million homes in the next 5 years, here's our plan. First of all, we're going to double the Housing Accelerator Fund and make it permanent. We're going to call it the Canada Homes Transfer. This is a transfer that's actually going to give the power to build more homes in communities across this country. It's going to speed up the process. It's going to support municipalities. It's going to help build more homes that people can actually afford. And then we know with a lot of homes or a lot of municipalities to build those homes, they need the infrastructure in place, the sewage, the water connections. So we're going to put in place a Community First Fund. This Community First Fund is a fund that's going to support the building of the infrastructure needed to build these homes. We can get this done. It can be achieved if we make it a priority. And again, for us, we want to build homes that people can actually afford, and that's why we're going to tie all of this funding. It's going to be in total $16 billion of funding. It's going to be tied to conditions that municipalities and provinces have to make sure that these homes are actually going to stay affordable. Now, in contrast with Mark Carney, folks are starting to raise a lot of concerns that he doesn't seem like he's a person that's actually going to fix the housing crisis. And we can tell for a number of reasons. One, he was the chair of a company that sadly profited off the housing crisis. They saw the plight that people were in and saw there's an opportunity to make even more money and squeeze people who were in affordable homes, rent evicted people out of homes that were affordable. And so that's not something you can trust. And the Liberal plan right now is to keep the Housing Accelerator Fund temporary. They're not going to make it permanent, and they have not announced that. So they're not someone that they can be trusted to actually solve this concern that people have. And Pierre Poilievre wants to cut it entirely. He said he would cut the Housing Accelerator Fund. That's a wrong thing to do. So if you want someone that's actually going to tackle the problems that people are up against, building homes you can actually afford, making it a priority to put people first, not billionaires, not corporate landlords, but you and your family, vote for New Democrat. If you believe that you should be able to find a home that you can afford, vote for a New Democrat. Here in Toronto, I encourage you to vote for New Democrats, send them to Ottawa so they can fight for you and your family. Donc, on sait que c'est un temps difficile.
So we know that these are tough times, and in terms of housing, we know that a lot of people are worried and they cannot find affordable housing. In addition to that, they have lost their dream of owning a home. And I know that that's a big problem. So I am proposing today to solve that problem. We must build housing for people, affordable housing. So my commitment today in these tough times with the uncertainty created by Donald Trump and the concern that the cost of living will continue to increase, so my commitment today is that an NDP government will build 3 million homes over the next 5 years. 3 million homes that are affordable. And as I said yesterday, we will tie that funding for housing to certain conditions. The condition that municipalities and provinces must control rents. There must be legislation brought in to bans rent-evictions and protects renters. That's critical for us. So let me explain our plan. The Housing Accelerator Fund will be doubled, the amount, and we will make it permanent. And we will call that fund the Canada Homes Transfer. That is a fund of $8 billion that will obviously be used to build affordable housing. In addition to that, we will create a community first fund that will help with the building of infrastructure that is necessary. We can do this. We can build housing, and we will do it. And we'll do it in a way where housing will remain affordable for you and your family. I know that with Mark Carney, there are concerns that he is not the kind of person who's really going to fix the housing crisis, because he participated in it and contributed to it. But with the Housing Accelerator Fund, we're not seeing the kind of commitment from him that we need. And Pierre Poilievre wants to completely remove any investments in building housing, so he won't fix the problem. If you want someone who will really fight for you and your family, who will fix the housing crisis and build affordable housing for you and not defend the province of millionaires or the real estate giants, then you have to vote for the NDP. We are there for you, and we will defend your interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now take the questions from the press. One question, one follow-up. On va maintenant prendre les questions des journalistes, une question et une relance. We'll start with Mike Lecouteur, CTV.
Mr. Singh, thanks for taking our questions. At a time when Canadians are worried about a recession and as a result of tariffs from the U.S., you are proposing quite an expensive program here. What are you going to do to pay for this?
Well, we've laid out a number of measures to actually pay for these programs, but let me just talk about in general the threat of a recession. It's a real threat. There are real concerns that we might find ourselves in a position where we're up against a lot of difficulty. We have found throughout history that you don't cut your way out of a recession. That just makes the pain even worse. What you have to do is invest in people. And with the uncertainty in the States and how that's impacting workers in Canada, we actually need to invest in our country. And what we need to do, because we also are up against a housing crisis, is to build in our country. We need to build up a stronger economy. So these investments are going to create jobs in Canada that are not dependent on the United States. Building infrastructure in communities so we can build more homes, that creates local jobs, and it builds up our country. Investing in building more homes will give people a place to live. It also fights back against inflation by building homes that are affordable. So these are investments to fight back against inflation by creating local jobs in our country and building up our economy. In terms of how we pay for it, we've laid out a number of means. One of those is to end the offshore tax havens. Many reports are putting the amount that we lose through tax avoidance and offshore tax havens in close to $30 billion a year that we lose. CRA's put out reports saying we're losing billions and tens of billions of dollars. So there's massive revenue that we could recover by ending tax havens, by closing the loopholes, and making sure companies pay exactly what they owe. Not increasing taxes, but just collecting what we owe could increase revenue significantly. I've also talked about victory bonds as a way for Canadians to invest in our country, to invest in the infrastructure and the housing needs that we have. There's ways for Canadians to invest like we did during the World Wars. Victory bonds are a way for Canadians to actually have stability. And with all the mess of the market that we're seeing, it's actually a more guaranteed investment for a lot of people. It probably makes a lot of sense for people who are worried about the fluctuations in the market. Having that guarantee and that return on investment is a good way, and also knowing that you're investing in your country. So these are some of the ways that we could raise those funds.
As a follow-up, the way you've laid it out, there are some assumptions in there that people will actually buy into these programs and buy those bonds. what are you going to do to make sure that the program that you're presenting as a platform is balanced and fiscally responsible for Canadians when they look to vote? Because the other two parties are looking to be that type of fiscal responsibility.
Well, if we contrast the approach between us and the other parties, we're actually laying out some revenue streams. We're talking about canceling things like fossil fuel subsidies. Again, billions of dollars get wasted in that area. There's money going to highly profitable companies that we would end. We're talking about ending private consultants. That's hundreds of millions of dollars being wasted there. And we're talking about closing in on the loopholes and ensuring that there's an end to tax avoidance, recovering billions of dollars. So we're laying out a plan to increase revenue. In contrast, what Mark Carney's saying, and more Canadians are worried about it, is he's saying, I'm going to give tax breaks to the richest, but to pay for those tax breaks, his plan, is to cut services for Canadians. He's already come out and said that. And Liberals, insiders, have also confirmed that that's his plan. I think that's the wrong plan. To cut the things that people need just to give tax breaks for millionaires is wrong. And if you disagree with that, you need to send more New Democrats to Ottawa to fight back.
Merci. Maintenant, Valérie Gamache, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. Singh.
Hello,
C'est frais à
Mr.
Toronto,
Singh.
beaucoup plus frais qu'en Colombie-Britannique,
No,
où nous nous rendons tout à
we're in
l'heure.
Toronto
Vous n'êtes pas
here.
seul
It's a bit
d'ailleurs à
cool.
mettre les pieds en Colombie-Britannique aujourd'hui.
Now, others are in British Columbia today, including Mark Carney. What does this tell you about the battle in British Columbia? Well, I think there's a battle everywhere. We're in a very important election now, and in British Columbia, as is the case here in Toronto and in Ontario, there is an important choice to be made in this election. Who will really fight for you? Who will defend what you hold dear? Who will defend our healthcare system against Donald Trump's attacks, against privatization, and against cuts? Because increasingly people are worried, and they've started to reject the Poilievre plan because he directly states that he will cut healthcare and other social programs. And Mark Carney increasingly is talking about cuts in services and healthcare, and people are afraid of that. So in this election, you have a choice to vote for the NDP that will defend what you hold dear. Healthcare, social programs, what defines this country? And Mr. Carney met earlier with the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby. Now, does this diminish the support Mr. Eby gave you? No. In an election, it is reasonable for the Premier of British Columbia to be meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada. So I think that's reasonable. And I'm proud of the support that I received from Premier Eby. He showed the people of British Columbia the value of voting for the NDP, what it gives you. It gives you a government that is on your side, that will defend your interests. We saw massive investments in healthcare in British Columbia. That's something that Canadians hold dear as a value. And that's exactly what you will have with New Democrat MPs in Ottawa. So if you want someone to fight for you, to defend the environment, health care, and social programs, and not defend the interests of billionaires, vote for the NDP.
Yeah, I think it's totally reasonable for the Premier of BC, Premier Eby, to be meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada, particularly with all the threats that we're faced against as a country. Totally reasonable. I am very honored to receive the endorsement of Premier Eby and his support because you get to see what you get with a New Democrat. You're seeing in British Columbia massive investments in healthcare, building of homes that are affordable. You're seeing the benefit of voting New Democrat. And so that's why I encourage everybody, if you want someone that's going to fight to defend the things that you hold dear, like your healthcare, fight against the cuts that sadly Mark Carney is raising more and more. If you want someone that's going to put your interests first, not corporate landlords and billionaires, vote for a New Democrat. Send New Democrats to Ottawa to stand up for you.
Thank you. Now, Ashley Burke, CBC.
Good afternoon, Mr. Singh. When you look back on the supply and confidence deal in the last sitting of Parliament and you reflect on that, is there anything that you'd do differently, including ending it earlier?
Well, when I think about that time, I really think about the people that were impacted. And one of the people that I think about a lot, I think about Susan. And she insists I call her Sue, so I'm going to call her Sue. I met her in Ottawa at a dentist's office, and she had received her dental card in the mail, but was nervous to use it. She thought it gave me hope, but if I went to use it and it didn't work, I didn't want to lose that hope. But she invited me to come with her to her visit, and she's a senior on a fixed income, and she's also a cancer survivor, and her cancer treatment meant that she lost her teeth. And she was in the dentist's office with a picture of her smile that she had before the cancer treatment. She said, I just want my smile back. It would give me back my dignity. And the dentist looked at her and said, we're going to make that happen. The dentist, who's also in the office, said, we're going to make that happen for you, and it's going to be covered by this program. And I was there when she broke down in tears of joy, and she looked at me and held my hand. That's who I fought for. That's who New Democrats fought for. Now millions of people like Sue were able to go to the dentist for the first time. I'm proud that we were able to support Sue, and that's who we fought for. And that's who we always fight for. We fight for people. So when you vote for us, people who voted for New Democrats, you're the reason why we have that. You're the reason why Sue was able to get her teeth fixed, why millions of Canadians are able to see a dentist, and now millions more are going to get pharmacare. It's because you voted for us. So vote for more of us, and we'll fight for you again.
So it sounds like you have nothing you would change, no regrets with how that was handled. Because you are in a position now where you're halfway through a campaign and you're trailing far behind the Liberals and the Conservatives in the polls. And you've acknowledged that there are challenges you're facing. But what are those challenges, and did any of it have to do with that deal?
Well, I think, again, about the people that we've helped and how we were only able to do this because people voted for us and sent us to Ottawa. So folks who want to see pharmacare expanded, for example, we were able to get 3 provinces now where they're going to have free diabetes medication and devices, free birth control. That's because of New Democrats. If you want to see that expanded, if you want to see that happen here in Ontario, well, you need to elect more New Democrats to force the government to do it, because it's never going to happen otherwise. So if you want these things to happen, if you want more help for people, vote for a New Democrat. And because we were able to be there and fight for people and deliver these things, that's why we have them. And I'm proud of that. That's what New Democrats have always done. The reason why we have universal health care is because people voted for New Democrats, and Tommy Douglas was able to bring in universal health care. Our pensions, our old age security, all of these things that we're proud of that make us Canadian, that make us different from the United States, are things that New Democrats fought for and delivered for Canadians. Elect more of us and we'll continue that work.
Thank you. Next question, Richard Warnica, Toronto Star.
Hi, Mr. Singh. You have a goal to build 3 million houses at the same time you want to impose national rent control. Why would private developers and private capital invest at rental at the scale you're going to need if they can't charge market rents?
Now, we've looked at this question, and we've looked at rental startups or rental build startups in markets where there's rent control, and we did not see that it had an impact on slowing down builds. What we're proposing are incentives and investments that will make it easier to build more homes, but we're not going to make investments unless there's a guarantee that the homes are going to remain affordable. What's the point of spending massive amounts of federal money just to have homes that have no rent control, no protection for the tenants, no laws against rent eviction, and we lose all the affordable homes that we already have, and what we build becomes unaffordable in just a couple of years? That's not a good investment. So we are going to tie the investments that we're making to affordability. There's no point to build homes that people can't afford. We did a roundtable with young people in Halifax yesterday, and a lot of young people were saying, you know, I see towers going up in my community, but they're all unaffordable. They're all luxury condos. I can't afford that. It doesn't actually help me out. I want people to see towers going up in their community and say, you know what? I'm actually going to be able to live in that home because it's affordable.
I've heard you say a lot, send New Democrats to Ottawa, on TV mostly. I'm just following today. But I haven't heard you say a lot, I think I can be Prime Minister. Do you think you can win this election? Can you win the most seats?
Well, I can answer that question in the context of what happened in a minority government. Having been there, I can tell you just 25 of us really changed the face of our healthcare system. For the first time, we saw an expansion, including millions of people that are getting dental care, millions of people that will get medication coverage. I could tell you with 25 New Democrats, we were able to do that because you voted for us and sent us there. If you vote for enough of us and we're able to form government, I would be honored to serve as Prime Minister. People will choose the outcome of this election. I'm encouraging people to vote for as many New Democrats as you can, because that's the only way you'll have someone that's actually going to fight for you, to stand up for things that matter for you and your family.
Thank you. Last question, David Baxter, Canadian Press.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. Earlier today, we saw Pierre Poilievre talking about what he's calling a one-and-done strategy for permitting on major resource projects. You yourself have talked about wanting to build an east-west energy corridor. What would the permitting process look like for that? And do you think it'd be something that could be permitted in under a year if the NDP formed government?
Well, one of the things I want to contrast with Pierre Poilievre is that he's talking about making Canada more like the U.S., cutting the rules that we have to protect workers, the rules to protect the environment, our important relationship with Indigenous people. He's suggesting that those things can be skipped over, making us more like the United States. That's not what Canadians want. They're starting to reject the message of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives more and more because he wants us to be more like the United States. Canadians want to be proud of who we are, and we don't want to be the 51st state, not just in name, but also in values and who we are. And so I believe we can absolutely build important projects like an east-west energy grid. We can build that, but we have to respect the environment. We have to ensure that it creates good local jobs. We have to make sure that we're working in partnership, in collaboration with Indigenous communities. That's how we build projects in our country, and that's the way we should always build projects.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what some of my colleagues were asking about with the end of supply and confidence and how things are looking right now. Is maybe think back to in Windsor, some people at the Stellantis plant saying, oh, you should have called the election earlier, and you defended that once again with the dental care and pharmacare piece. If the voters don't choose the NDP this election and things don't go the way you want it to, would it be worth it for you in the end of the day that pharmacare and dental care, some deals got signed, dental care got expanded before this election, even if the NDP doesn't have a great outcome?
If the question is, you're asking me, is it worth it that millions of people are able to look after their teeth and millions of people have pharmacare, including diabetes medication and free birth control? Yeah, it's worth it. That's what we're here for. That's why we're New Democrats. We believe in making life better for people. It's always worth it to make people's lives better. That's why people vote for us. They vote for us to fight for them. So if you want someone that's going to fight for you, that's going to make sure you're a priority, that's not going to toe the line for billionaires or for CEOs, someone that's going to say, I'm going to fight every single day in Ottawa to defend my community, the values that Canadians hold dear, like universal public health care. They're going to fight to build homes you can actually afford, not to make rich investors richer, but to give families a chance to start their life. Vote for a New Democrat.
Thank you very much. That concludes the press conference today. Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. Merci. Bonne journée.
Merci. Thanks so much.
Okay, friends, we've been taking you live to Toronto, where the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, has been making a policy announcement on the campaign trail, this time about making housing affordable, a real key issue for many Canadians as we are heading into the federal election and voting day. But also there you saw Jagmeet Singh being questioned again and again about the party's standing. Right now in the polls, the NDP is trailing far, far behind both the Liberals and the Conservatives. To put all of this into context, let's turn to CBC's Kate McKenna, who's been listening in from Ottawa. So, Kate, what were the standout points for you?
Well, if you don't mind, Natasha, I think we should start with the announcement, which was a $16 billion housing strategy. They say they would build 3 million homes by 2030. And of course, they're in the GTA, where this is a major issue. It's an issue across Canada, but in particularly the GTA. So their plan would involve doubling the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is a fund that municipalities can apply for and unlock funding that would then go towards the eventual building of more housing. And they're also proposing stronger rent protections to stop rent evictions and price gouging, and faster construction and good jobs with Canadian-made materials and modern methods. So they say that they would make the Housing Accelerator Fund permanent and double the value of it. So that was the announcement today. But once again, Jagmeet Singh is kind of dogged with questions about why his party does not seem to be resonating with Canadians at this time in public opinion polling. And he was asked about whether or not his party stayed in the agreement with the Liberals for too long, effectively, hurting his chances in the next election. But he defended it, as he does all of the time, saying, their involvement in that agreement led to dental care. It led to kind of the framework for pharmacare and some contraceptives and diabetes drugs and devices being made available for people in some provinces that could potentially be extended in the next government. We'll see. And he says, that's what the NDP is there for. And if you elect more NDP members, then there could be other things like that if they go on to hold the balance of power. Now, he was asked, does he see himself as being in the running for prime minister? And he sort of dodged that question, saying, if you elect us, we will go fight for you. So that is an interesting development, and it does mark a bit of a shift from what he was saying at the beginning of this campaign.
CBC's Kate McKenna in Ottawa. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
Now, while Jagmeet Singh was speaking, the leader of the Bloc Quebecois was also speaking in Montreal. Here is Yves-François Blanchet.
It is the mirror of the soul of Quebecers and of a nation. Without a culture, obviously, one would wonder what difference is there that we want to protect. It's the economic sectors of whom do we want to protect. A nation that expresses itself differently, that is unique, and that wants to shine well above its economic weight. Now, that reality is terribly threatened today for the reasons that I just mentioned. So I just want to talk about a series of measures that we're proposing. They are well known. We think that 3% of ad revenues from the digital giants should be put into a fund, not a federal tax that goes into the government's consolidated fund. No, a separate fund, and it shouldn't be called a tax, in fact, because it's a royalty. A royalty is an amount of money that is paid out to use content that doesn't belong to someone. And that is clearly what we are talking about when digital giants are using ad revenues from that content that come from the media or the cultural system here in Quebec and Canada as well. So that is certainly at the core of our vision. And we think that an equivalent on the goods and services tax, because the U.S. is threatening to put that on the table in a future negotiation, should be protected, but also directed to the cultural industry to ensure that it can remain viable. And we believe that the granting programs must also be tightened up to be sure that the proportion of the representativeness of the cultural industry, for example, music or audiovisual, will mean that 40% of those amounts are reserved to francophones. Why 40% when we don't represent 40% of the population? Well, the fact is you need a certain mass there, a certain amount there for it to work. We also think that as quickly as possible, we have to move towards the Quebec equivalent of the CRTC. Ottawa has to recognize the need for cultural interests to be managed, including telecommunications, by Quebec. And of course, that would be part of a vision for francophones outside Quebec as well. Now, the modernization of Radio-Canada CBC is an absolute necessity. I want to observe that as Ms. Saint-Onge, when she announced her policy, was talking about how she thought things should work in future in terms of the balance between the mandate of a government institution and the imbalance created in terms of private radio broadcasters who are facing extremely difficult circumstances in many cases, and so that means services are being cut, whether we're talking about regional production or actual programs, and there is a floor below which we can no longer produce programs, and I think we're arriving at that stage right now. So I think there's a need to ensure that there's a policy for Radio-Canada. It has to be fair. In other words, all the services that are there should be made available. In fact, there should be no ads in news programs either. And we shouldn't be saying to Radio-Canada, okay, here's $150 million, no strings attached, without thinking of the need to ensure the financial means that are required in the private sector to produce those programs. And I think we also need to work on a relaxation of some of the rules when it comes to the media in general, broadcasting and production, so that we can improve their competitiveness and their productivity. activity, because if the costs are high, then there won't be as much, and we want more. And so that's the problem. It ends up being a vicious cycle. In terms of arts and culture, the GST should be returned to those industries that are creating those cultural products and be managed by them. We also need to ensure that these works can be discovered, that the public can have access to them through various platforms. The legislation says this already, but the CRTC rules are a challenge when it comes to ensuring that people can consume cultural content, creations, and benefit from these Quebec and French language creations, and Indigenous as well, without it constantly being international giants taking up all the space. So that is the thing. The devil is in the details, and we have to ensure that people can be exposed to Quebec creations and Quebec content. And finally, when these works promote Quebec and Indigenous cultures, I think there has to be tax benefits granted for that purpose. And finally, for the artists, modernizing copyright seems to be something that's absolutely urgent, and there's a significant challenge in that area that's related to, people pirating ad revenues from the media through the digital giants, and now the same ones are using what is called artificial intelligence, which is really more complex algorithms, to remove content or use content that belongs to the creators. And so that's being pirated and used in content that is then broadcast in a different way. And at the same time, those digital giants are getting revenues from that. I mean, that takes a certain amount of courage, but at the same time, they're very, very powerful. And when we're talking about artificial intelligence, the fact is that only the big industries are saying, oh, well, that's the future, but we have to rein that in and counter that trend. And now let's talk about revenues. Now, this is the case in other industries or sectors, and we're promoting this fairly actively in various sectors. We believe that artists whose activity is irregular, and therefore their revenues are irregular, should have the right to extend their revenues over more than 1 year if they have a particularly lucrative year one year and less so the following year, because otherwise there's a total imbalance in their revenues. And finally, we think that the employment insurance program has to be changed to provide a comparable system to the one that is available for seasonal workers. And, there are a number of artists who can make a living from their art, but that's not the case for everyone. And it's more, and for many artists, their revenues are more sporadic, so they need to have access to the employment insurance program as well. And that program has to recognize the seasonality of their work. And finally, it's important to remember that we're talking about $17.4 billion in contributions through the cultural industries, 4.3% of the GDP. And I am enthusiastic about other industries as well in Quebec: fisheries, aluminum, forestry, and our own quantum computing, aeronautics. There are many different sectors. But culture is worth more of any of those sectors in terms of its economic weight, and that's 173,000 jobs. 173,000 jobs in an environment where there could be a slowdown and possibly even a recession. People are wondering where they can put their money to ensure there's as much economic activity as possible. There are some people who are saying, oh, it's terrible to be investing in arts and culture, but they should realize that that's one of the best places to be investing right now, because not only is this critical to the Quebec identity, but it's one of the best means of having economic spin-offs right across Quebec in a period of economic slowdown when we're threatened by the hostile efforts of our U.S. neighbor when we're talking about the content of arts and culture and language. So sorry I talked a bit too long, but I think it's very important that we focus on that issue.
Alors, nous allons débuter la période de questions pour les journalistes. En rappel, une question de suivi pour les journalistes. Merci de vous nommer ainsi que le média que vous représentez. Bonjour, Émilie Bergeron, la presse
Hello,
canadienne.
la presse canadienne.
Sur la taxe sur les
On
services
the
numériques,
digital
vous semblez
tax,
avoir des craintes que,
you seem
si
to
M.
be
Carney
concerned that if
remporte cette
Mr.
élection,
Carney
il
wins the
pourrait,
election,
sacrifier la culture
he
et
could
notamment la
sacrifice
taxe sur les services
culture
numériques dans les
and the digital
négociations avec,
tax
les
in negotiations with the U.S.
Qu'est-ce qui nourrit ces craintes-là?
Why do you feel that way in a context where, in fact, it's the Liberals under the former Prime Minister who actually brought in that legislation on digital taxation? And the Liberals have said they're in favor of that. Well, you've used two words that do not correspond to what we're saying. This is not a tax that we're talking about. What other word did you use? Oh, a tax. It's not a tax at all. This is fundamental in the arts industry. If you're talking about an artist back in 1990 who was able to gather enough money to produce something, that was good, but not necessarily, that person was not necessarily able to really sell it. So now, when you sell your material, then you get a royalty. Now, what the digital giants do is they take something developed by someone else, funded by someone else, and they take their ads revenues based on that content without paying for it. So we're not talking about a tax. And when the federal government says, oh, this is great, I'm going to take 3% of those sales, well, the government can keep that money and do whatever it wants with it. I am not assuming what the result of the election will be. We see a certain trend there, but I'm simply saying that I don't know anything at this stage, in terms of the comments made by the Liberal leader, that suggest knowledge or interest or any sensitivity to the Quebec language, the Quebec arts and culture industry, and so forth. And therefore, I think it's quite clear that Quebecers must consider, in the cultural sector and elsewhere, that there is a presence and perhaps even the balance of power between people who will only speak for Quebec about culture. Mr. Carney said with respect to supply management that it's not necessary to bring in legislation to protect that. And your bill died on the order paper.
Folks, we have been taking you to Quebec, where Bloc Quebecois leader Yves-François Blanchet has been making a policy announcement and also answering questions from reporters as he continues the campaign trail across the province of Quebec in this federal election. Once again, let's turn to Kate McKenna, joins us live from Ottawa, listening in on all the candidates. What's the big takeaway for you, Kate?
Well, it's Culture Day for the Bloc Quebecois. That's their focus today. Yves-François Blanchet's in Montreal. He met with ADSQ, which is a nonprofit organization that supports independent music industry people in Quebec. It's something he knows very well because he used to be the president of that organization. And he outlined sort of some of his plans or his promises going into this election on the subject of culture. So we heard him talking about taking cuts of tax that would then go back to artists, that artists should be able to, or people within the cultural industry should be able to extend revenues over multiple years so that they don't get dinged when they're doing their income tax. For instance, if they have one very profitable year and then another year where they make less money, that should be balanced out over multiple years. He also called for modernization of CBC Radio Canada. That's something that the Liberals have put in the window that he would like to see actually happen. And also changes to employment insurance to cover artists in the same way that seasonal workers are covered. So that's kind of what he's putting in the window today, and he was answering questions on that as well.
CBC's Kate McKenna in Ottawa. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
Party leaders are watching as fears of a recession are gripping global financial markets. Some experts are even calling today Panic Monday. When the markets opened almost 2 hours ago, the major indexes plummeted multiple percentage points, but they have since rebounded slightly. Much of this turbulence comes in response to the tariffs that U.S. President Donald Trump imposed on about 90 countries last week, with investors trying to figure out what it all means for the global economy. And the worst may be yet to come, as the highest tariff rates don't come into full effect until Wednesday. CBC's Mark Harksall is watching this story for us. So Mark, walk us through what's been happening so far today.
And Natasha, it's not good. We always get the early indication on the markets, obviously, from overseas, Asia and Europe. So looking at that, even just toward the end of last week into this week, opening down, of course, because it was a rough end to last week. Hong Kong, we saw main equity benchmark losing 13% into the end of last week. Shanghai, Taipei, Tokyo saw their indexes fall 7 to 10%. In Europe, London, Germany, and France all down around 4 to 5% in their markets. We move over here to home soil in North America, and you'll remember late last week, U.S. stocks lost $6.6 trillion in value at the end of last week after the larger than expected reciprocal tariffs on U.S. Liberation Day, as President Trump calls it. They were larger than expected, and China announced that it would match any tariffs that it got from the U.S. China, of course, the big manufacturer on this planet. And last week was the worst week for U.S. stocks since the start of COVID. Today, the pain just sort of continued. They started the week in that direction. There was a slight uptick today due to some news that perhaps the U.S. would hold off on those tariffs announced for 90 days. But the White House was very quick in announcing to CNBC that that was fake news and that they would not hold back. And we sort of saw the stocks go up slightly on that news and then right back down when that fake news declaration came out. There's a letter to shareholders in the latest report from Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan, very influential. He says, quote, "The recent tariffs will likely increase inflation and are causing many to consider a greater probability of a recession." Those are two very dangerous words. These significant and somewhat unprecedented forces cause us to remain very cautious. Now, we have a graph here. Here's a look at the impact on stock markets across the globe since Donald Trump's inauguration in January. You see, Germany shot up quite a bit at first. They're still up from where they started, but not as high up. Same goes for China. You've got the United Kingdom kind of breaking even thus far for the most part, but then us here in Canada, the United States, and Japan all down since Donald Trump took office. No one seems to want to speak strongly against Donald Trump at this point. It could be a bit of fear, but there are people saying that there are signs of inflation and, again, a recession. On Truth Social, the president sent out a message earlier today saying oil prices are down, interest rates are down. He's saying that the Fed has to cut rates on interest, but food prices are down. There is no inflation, and the long-time abused USA is bringing in billions of dollars a week from the abusing countries on tariffs that are already in place. He goes on to say that he's going to make America great again, essentially, but the numbers don't show it. The S&P 500 index down around 2% so far. It's on the brink of a bear market. The NASDAQ is in a bear market. We look at the live tickers now. That's the Dow Jones index on the left, down 2% so far today. The TSX opened down as well and almost immediately dropped over 3% at one point. It's up a little bit now from where it started today because of that news that we had initially spoken about, but not much. But to borrow some sage words from Floor Director Bob over here off camera, you can't see him. It's not bad for everyone. Not Vladdy Guerrero with the Jays. He signed a $500 million 14-year deal. So I guess there's hope for some. We got to get good at baseball.
You know what? There was talk about, are we going to be able to slip this baseball story in today, considering everything that's happening in the world? Mark Harksall got the job done.
Do it all.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.
The White House is likely watching all this market turbulence, and it's causing a lot of political confusion there as well. CBC's Katie Nicholson joins us now from Washington. So, Katie, President Trump is threatening additional tariffs now on China, despite the fact that some of his allies are urging him to put a pause on the tariffs, at least for a few months. Walk us through what's been breaking just within the last hour or so.
Yeah, so this is from Truth Social. This is essentially a response to China's retaliatory tariffs of 34%. In this post, the president saying, if China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, April 8th, 2025, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. That's Wednesday. And additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. Worth noting last night on Air Force One that the president repeatedly brought up China, clearly really ticked off with this retaliatory move by China. China has indicated that it feels it is well suited or well poised to enter into a trade war with the U.S. Simply because of all the trade barriers that they've been dealing with for the last decade. So while the president is doubling down, there are people who are urging him to back off a little bit. Among them is Bill Ackman. He's a hedge fund billionaire. He is a MAGA supporter. So it really is notable when he took to X yesterday and he basically urged the president in a very long post to put a 90-day pause on these tariffs. So here is a little bit, because it's a lot, here's a little bit of what he posted. He said, "The president has an opportunity to call a 90-day timeout, negotiate and resolve unfair asymmetric tariff deals, and induce trillions of dollars of new investment in our country. If, on the other hand, on April 9th, we launch economic nuclear war on every country in the world, business investments will grind to a halt." Now, he does go on to sort of compare this to, or say that without changing course, the U.S. is heading for a self-induced economic nuclear winter. So the White House has been pushing back against comments like this as sort of hyperbolic. A lot of their narrative over the weekend is that the media is making too much of the market drop. But this isn't the media, right? This is a mega billionaire who is saying that this White House really is steering them off a cliff. So White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett was on Fox and Friends this morning pushing back against those words from Ackman. Here is Hassett.
I would urge everyone, especially Bill, to ease off the rhetoric a little bit. A lot of us at the White House think that these economic responses are exaggerated by critics. Even if you think that there will be some negative effect from the trade side, that's still a small share of GDP. And so the idea that it's going to be a nuclear winter or something like that is completely irresponsible rhetoric.
So now we get into this little weird sort of fluttering of the markets. Part of that interview on Fox was taken out of context, and it was suggested that Hassett said that the Trump administration was actually thinking about taking Ackman up on that suggestion that there be a 90-day tariff pause. The market swung, and then the White House said, no, absolutely not. That is fake news. There is going to be no 90-day pause. So that's sort of how that played out in the market this morning, very briefly. And the president, of course, spent much of the weekend in Florida playing golf before he came back to D.C. last night on Air Force One. And he sort of continued to sort of talk about this analogy of the American economy as a patient and the tariffs being some sort of necessary medical intervention. So this was his response when he was asked if there's any kind of threshold for how much pain in the market he is willing to allow.
I think your question is so stupid. I mean, I think it's I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. And we have such a horrible, we have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen. They took our businesses, they took our money, they took our jobs, they moved it to Mexico, they moved it to Canada, they moved a lot of it to China.
And I feel like we're throwing a lot to Truth Social today, but he did post again that the United States has a chance to do something that should have been done decades ago. Don't be weak, don't be stupid, don't be a panican, which is a new party, he says, based on weak and stupid people. Be strong, courageous, and patient, and greatness will be the result. So again, a message to the American people, perhaps also the markets, that stay the course with us on this tariff plan.
So we see how the rhetoric is heating up, particularly with China and the U.S. relations. Let's turn to Israeli-American relations. They're closer allies. They've been able to work together in the past. So a lot of eyes are going to be on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu because he's in Washington. Is he going to be able to negotiate a better deal for Israeli trade with the United States? And what else should we be watching for in those meetings?
Yeah, so like a lot of friendly nations, they were also slapped with tariffs, this time a 17% tariff. So Netanyahu actually was here yesterday. He met with the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick ahead of a sit-down with the president today. It's really important to note that the U.S. is Israel's largest single trading partner. So that 17% tariff, that's a really big deal to them. And the Times of Israel said that last year, the U.S. imported more than $13.5 billion worth of goods from Israel. So there's a lot of sectors that are particularly feeling vulnerable in Israel, and biotech, chemicals, fuels, robotics, electronic components. Obviously, though, tariffs are not going to be the only thing on the table. The White House agenda includes Iranian nuclear and regional activity, the situation in Gaza, including the ongoing hostage concerns, as well as developments in Syria, and sort of the fraying Israel-Turkey relations. But it will be interesting to see how tariffs figure into those discussions and whether or not they give the U.S. any leverage in its own agenda.
CBC's Katie Nicholson in Washington. Thank you, Katie. All right, let's return now to the federal election campaign. Liberal leader Mark Carney is making his first campaign stop in British Columbia today. The Conservatives' Pierre Poilievre is also in BC. We're expecting to hear from him in just a few moments, and we'll bring you that live as soon as it gets underway. Now, he's going to be spending his day in the community of Terrace before flying to Edmonton for a rally there this evening. So let's take a closer look at what the leaders are saying and doing. We have reached strategic communications expert Jennifer Stewart. She's also the CEO of Syntax Strategic, a national communications agency. Jennifer, good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Natasha.
So, Jennifer, let's talk about Mark Carney, the Liberal leader. He's in BC for the first time during this campaign. Sometimes BC has proven difficult for the Liberals. Everything about this election feels different. But what do you want to hear from Carney? What does he need to say in order to make up some ground here?
Yeah, there's no standard messaging, and this is no standard election. This is probably the most consequential election of our lifetime, Natasha. So what he needs to do is he needs to ensure that he has message discipline. So I believe he's talking about lumber today. Look, Canadians generally aren't part of a national conversation about lumber. It's very inside baseball. So he needs to draw that lumber connection back to housing. He needs to say, you can't talk about affordable housing without talking about lumber. It is the backbone of the Canadian dream. So what I want to see from him is the constant correlation and connection to the main ballot box issue, which is Mr. Trump, and then those knock-on effects, which is the cost of living. And again, lumber is a very complicated, convoluted sector, and he needs to make it simple and basic and draw the connection to the pocketbooks of Canadians and that Canadian dream of owning a home.
We talked about this last week, but we talked about it before the lengthy charter list came out of all of the countries being hit by tariffs. And the question I want to pose to you is again about Mark Carney, which is he's got this double duty, each of which is his job for the first time as leader of the Liberal Party, running in a campaign for the first time. And then also being the prime minister, because he has had to stop campaigning to manage the tariff crisis with the president. What do you make of how he's managed these past few days?
So far, he's managed it very well. He needs to very clearly communicate and articulate when he needs to wear the prime ministerial hat, which he did when he was responding to Liberation Day. And then he needs to be seen as campaigning and, talking about the Liberal message and what the Liberal Party of Canada is going to do for Canadians. But, he has to look prime ministerial. He's trying to do this while he's campaigning as well. You continue to see the message that, look, I was the governor of the Bank of England. I have managed crises. I managed Brexit. And as a result, I can continue to lead as prime minister and manage in very difficult economic times. You saw Mr. Carney speaking today about the fact that we are likely heading into a recession because of the continued market drops in response to the tariffs. So even when he's on the campaign trail, he's continuing to wear that prime ministerial hat.
Let's turn our attention to Pierre Poilievre, also running. It's really come down to, it seems, according to the polls, between Carney and Poilievre. So he, too, is in British Columbia. He's going to head to Edmonton later on this evening. He's got these huge rallies, tons and tons of people coming out. And he has said that some want him to shift his messaging to be more focused on Donald Trump and more focused on the tariffs. And he's pushed back, saying, I know that's what you want, but I don't agree. What do you make of the strength of that message, saying, no, I know what I stand for, I'm going to stick to that?
Look, I think he's trying to juxtapose himself with Mr. Carney, who's made the entire election about Mr. Trump. And I would argue we have seen a pivot in Mr. Poilievre's messaging, whereby he is talking about the issues, affordable housing, the cost of living, but he continues to draw that connection back to Mr. Trump and the impacts on those issues as a result of the tariffs. So we're going to see him talk about natural resources today, I suspect, and he will draw a connection and a parallel to why we need to strengthen our own domestic production and our own energy production in response to the tariffs to ensure that we can continue to grow stronger. So there has been a pivot, but he's going to ensure that that pivot aligns with the issues that he wants to talk about.
Let's talk about Jagmeet Singh. We carried his policy announcement earlier in the show live, and he was questioned again and again in sometimes roundabout ways about the party's standing. He is no longer saying, I'm going to be the next prime minister. He's not even being introduced that way by other members of the NDP. He keeps saying, just elect as many of us as possible. It would be the honor of my life to be prime minister, but all I ask is just elect more and more of us. Does that positioning make him look like he's in touch with reality, or does it make him look weak?
It makes him look weak. Look, you have to act like a winner, even if you're not in a winning position. He is catering to very niche populations of Canada. His messaging has not been particularly strong. He keeps coming back to the fact that Mr. Carney is a millionaire with billionaire associations. I've made this point before, just look south of the border. I think people do not care. They frankly just need somebody that can manage that U.S. relationship. So, it really is a two-horse race. The NDP are not in it. And I think CBC, if you look at your poll tracker, they're going to lose a lot of seats. And unless they have a very significant pivot and he starts projecting himself as a prime minister and being more centrist. Look, former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney gave Mr. Poilievre the advice, fish where the fish are. Be a centrist. Focus on the economy. Focus on managing the relationship with the U.S. And that would be my advice to all leaders.
Fish where the fish are. I'm going to use that, Jennifer. Thank you for that one. Before I let you go, let me just ask you one thing, because so much of our news is dominated by what's happening in the global economy. And I know you're a communications expert, but I am curious, based on your extensive knowledge and experience, how much is the economic turmoil that so many Canadians are finding themselves in going to impact the way that they vote or the kind of messages they want to hear from the leaders?
I think it's absolutely everything, Natasha. I think that's an excellent question. I think at the end of the day, people want to be able to put food on the table and live a comfortable life and aspire for home ownership in Canada. And a lot of that has been taken away. So I think we always have to draw that message back to the pocketbook of Canadians. And I think ultimately people aren't going to vote for a party. They're going to vote for a leader who they feel will be their best advocate to weather these economic times.
All right, Jennifer Stewart, fishing where the fishes are. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Natasha.
Take care. We've been doing it all day, so let's stick with it. We need to check in on the North American financial markets as we near the midway point of the trading day. Now, they've been all over the place this morning, opening deeply in the red before bouncing back some, but then going back down. So right now in Toronto, the TSX is down 135 points. In New York, the Dow is off 472 points. Earlier, it was down nearly 3%, while the Nasdaq has shed about 50 points. The Canadian dollar is mostly flat, holding at just above 70 cents US. West Texas crude is down about 60 cents a barrel, while gold is down steeply once again, off $53 and now below $3,000 an ounce.
This market update is brought to you by Emirates. Fly Emirates. Fly better.
We are standing by to take you to British Columbia next hour. This is the scene in the community of Terrace, where Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre is set to deliver remarks at a campaign stop. Elsewhere, Liberal Party leader Mark Carney is going to hold an event in Victoria. We'll carry their comments for you live as soon as they get underway. Now, just remember that Pierre Poilievre is going to speak in French first, and then when he starts speaking in English, we'll carry those comments, and we'll also bring you questions and answers with reporters, including our own local reporters who are there on the ground. You're watching CBC News Network. Hello, everyone. I'm Natasha Fatah. Welcome inside the CBC Newsroom. Global markets plunged steeply to start the day following last week's two-day meltdown on both Bay Street and Wall Street. There was a bit of a bounce back, but they are still very much in the red. And much of this turbulence comes in response to the tariffs U.S. President Donald Trump imposed on about 90 countries last week, with investors trying to figure out what it all means for the global economy. But the worst may be yet to come, as the highest tariff rates don't come into full effect until Wednesday. CBC's Anis Hadari is looking into this story for us. So Anis, walk us through what's happening with the markets.
Essentially, investors started the day feeling much the same way they did on Thursday and Friday, at least from what we're seeing in these numbers. Even before the markets opened today, we saw that futures were going down. There were expectations before anyone started trading that they were going to be losing money and that they were expecting to be selling things off. We saw in Asian markets and overseas markets that as their days started, everything started to go down back into the red. The same things are happening here in North America as we really go through the day. The Dow Jones, as we speak, down 2%. The Toronto Stock Exchange down, it's down as well. I know that sometimes these numbers, when they're in point form, can be hard to understand, you know, minus 430 points on the TSX, minus 730, 740, you know, as they fluctuate on the Dow Jones. But essentially what this is telling us is that institutional investors, whether that be hedge funds, pension funds, just big movers and shakers in the market, they are selling off, really, and it's happening across all industries. And this is in particular because many of these tariffs that are happening, whether it is from the United States towards other countries or from other countries towards the United States, they could potentially affect the cost of everything, which means the cost of doing business for everyone could be affected. And as we saw earlier in the week, or I should say last week, that means everyone thinks they're going to lose money and they're selling.
So, as you mentioned, this happened last week. We anticipated a blowback on Thursday. Okay, yes, again on Friday. But then there was the weekend, and we thought maybe it would be softer come Monday. Like, why is this all continuing on to today?
One of the big things to note with markets like the New York Stock Exchange, like the Toronto Stock Exchange, and the overseas markets as well, is that when you zoom out and look at them as sort of an index, as a measure of what's happening right now in parts of the economy, what the markets will tell you is what investors think is coming in the future. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but in the next 6 months, the next year. It can depend on what specific stocks they're investing in. But what really is happening here is that on Thursday, markets were reacting to the so-called Liberation Day announcements on Wednesday. And that told us that on Thursday, they were surprised that things were as strict, let's say, as harsh as they might have been. And then on Friday, they dropped again because perhaps markets and those who move them were thinking, okay, like Donald Trump, somebody will back off. And then that didn't happen. And then over the weekend, there was talk from market analysts and economists like, well, maybe given the big losses on Thursday and Friday, maybe the White House will change something, will adjust something. Maybe other governments, Beijing, in particular, will adjust what it's doing in response to the markets dropping and big financial losses. Well, so far, that hasn't happened. So then again, today, markets are saying, whoa, no one's changed their mind. We think in the next few months, our projections are that we're going to keep losing money. So they are bailing on their stocks now. They're selling now. It just tells us that for several trading days in a row, they haven't had a positive outlook for the next 6 months. The tea leaves that they're reading haven't changed and haven't looked any better. And, you know, we've seen like a slight bounce when there's been rumors or comments from different players in America mostly that they might backtrack. And then you get another message from the White House saying, no, we are not changing our mind. And then that takes away the loss. It's a bit like following a puck that's zooming back and forth across the ice, but nobody seems to expect it to go in the net right now. So they're bailing on the game early and selling and cutting their losses.
CBC's Anis Hadari in Calgary. Thanks so much, Anis.
You're welcome.
As promised, let's take you to Terrace, British Columbia, where Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre is making a campaign announcement.
Law that Mark Carney wants to keep in place. But speaking of economic matters, we are all watching the stock market with interest today. We have to acknowledge that this chaos is the direct result of wrong-headed, unnecessary, chaotic policies coming from President Trump. These tariffs are a massive distraction, and they remind us why it was such a mistake for the Liberals to make us so dependent on the Americans over the lost Liberal decade. Now, obviously, Mark Carney will be trotting out his trophy titles and the inflated hype around his false resume claims on this day. But let's be clear, at this time, the last thing we need is to take a risk on the failed ideas of Mark Carney. Mark Carney has been wrong about every major economic issue of our time. He was wrong to support carbon taxes. He was wrong to oppose pipelines. He was wrong 4 years ago when he said the biggest risk to the world was deflation and proposed hundreds of billions of dollars of money printing. He was wrong when he caused the inflation crisis in Great Britain and the housing crisis in that country. He's been universally condemned by the British media, even though back here in Canada, the media covers up his failed record and his terrible reputation in the United Kingdom. We cannot afford a fourth Liberal term of Mark Carney driving up spending, money printing, taxes, and inflation while blocking our resource projects. We cannot afford that risk. We need a new Conservative government for a change that will axe taxes, greenlight construction of homes, mines, pipelines, LNG plants, bring home our jobs so that we can reinforce our economic fortress against the Americans. In the short term, my government has already proposed an immediate response to help our seniors. We've proposed to delay by 2 years the time when seniors must withdraw their savings from their RSP and be taxed on it. This 2-year delay will save many seniors from being forced to crystallize losses they're experiencing on the stock market today. We know that seniors should not pay the price for Donald Trump's economic vandalism over the last several days, and that is why we will allow our seniors to keep their money invested until they regain their lost amounts. We've also announced that we will allow seniors who choose to work to earn up to $34,000 tax-free. That's $10,000 more than right now. Je veux dire premièrement quelques mots à propos du chaos des marchés financiers.
I want to begin by talking about the chaos on the stock market.
We'll continue to listen to Pierre Poilievre as he makes those comments in French now, and we'll return to him as soon as he starts taking questions from reporters. But let's go to our favorite reporter, Kate McKenna, who's joining us live from Ottawa. So, Kate, he's going to repeat more or less the same thing he's just announced in Terrace, British Columbia. This is a key state for the Conservatives in this federal election. Set the stage for us.
Well, there he was directly speaking to the issue that's top of mind for a lot of Canadians, which is the stock market right now, which is having a real day. One of the earlier reporters described it as carnage. It seems to be bouncing around a little bit, and he says that's a direct response to Donald Trump's tariffs. So he did talk about that, but he is making this announcement in Terrace, British Columbia, taking aim at his opponent, his rival, Mark Carney, trying to make inroads in that area that has been held by the NDP for quite some time now. And it's an area that has both a large forestry industry, and we know that Trump is targeting softwood lumber for more tariffs, almost 35% in tariffs. And also that his announcement that he's set to make is about energy and speeding up energy projects. And, that is an area where LNG could be a real moneymaker if more projects go ahead. So that's sort of setting the stage for what he's set to announce in just a few minutes.
Okay, Kate, so stick around. We are going to go back to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He's completing his remarks in French, and then we're going to listen for those reporter questions.
There's no reason why we as Canadians cannot be the richest country in the world. We have the most resources, the most land, the most coastline per capita, pretty much any other country on earth. Well, there is one reason we're not the richest in the world. It's the lost Liberal decade. They've hiked taxes on investment, energy, work, home building, and of course they passed C-69, the anti-development law that Mark Carney says he wants to keep in place. they have also capped our energy production. As soon as Justin Trudeau and his economic advisor Mark Carney got their hands on Canada's resource policy, they began blocking projects. They blocked $178 billion of resource projects in the last decade. Mr. Carney has said, and I quote, "More than 80% of current fossil fuel reserves would need to stay in the ground." End quote. Unfortunately, this is the one promise that the Liberals have not broken. They brought in an industrial carbon tax and C-69, the no pipelines, no development law, and they've capped energy production in Canada. Mr. Carney says he wants to keep all those three policies in place. Avec toutes nos ressources naturelles, le Canada devrait être le pays le plus riche.
Resources, Canada should be the richest country in the world, the most self-reliant in the world. Nothing can justify the failure of the last Liberal decade. Nothing can justify that our country is not capable of realizing its full potential by developing our natural resources and creating development in the regions. Unfortunately, over the last 10 years, the Liberals have placed our economy in a position of weakness compared to the U.S. Justin Trudeau and his economic advisor, Mark Carney, unreasonably blocked $78 billion of natural resource projects. Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney are one and the same. Same Liberal team, same Liberal recipe, same Liberal results. Mark Carney even said he wants to keep 80% of our energy in the ground. Unfortunately, that is an approach that will kill jobs and make us more dependent on the United States and Donald Trump. The Liberals introduced a carbon tax on our industries. They introduced Bill C-69 that blocks natural resource development and will prevent LNG projects in future.
Same Liberal MPs, same Liberal policies, and it will have the same Liberal results. The Liberal war on Canada's resource economy has been devastating, just as the Liberals intended. Between 2015 and 2020, they killed 16 monster resource projects amounting to over $170 billion of lost investment in our economy. It now takes 17 years to get a project in mining approved, nearly 25% longer than in Australia and 40% longer in the States. This was by design. Liberals don't like these projects. Their radical environmental ideology prevents it from happening. We should be selling our resources to the world, breaking dependence on Putin and other foreign dictators, and going around the Americans. Canadian oil and clean natural gas should be displacing coal and reducing emissions worldwide by allowing India and other Asian countries to use our gas instead of dirty coal. But now we export 98% of our energy to the Americans at massive price discounts. That puts us at the tender mercies of Donald Trump and the Americans. I should point out, we are selling natural gas for $4 per British thermal unit to the Americans. It goes for $15 in Europe. So we're selling something for $4 that we could be getting $15 for, but for the fact that we don't have any export terminals that can move the gas overseas. All of them blocked by the Liberals. Only one is nearing completion, and that is LNG Canada here in this region, over in Kitimat, and that was a project approved by the previous Conservative government. And only could have happened with an industrial carbon tax exemption and by approval under the previous pre-C-69 rules. Today, with the industrial carbon tax, the Liberal industrial carbon tax, the Liberal energy cap, and the Liberal law C-69, that project never would have happened. The Conservative Party is going to reverse the Liberal agenda of blocking and keeping in the ground our resources. Today, I'm rolling out the next phase of our Canadian economic plan. I call it one and done. This rule will cut through red tape and get projects done quickly. Build fast, bringing jobs and paychecks home. This is what one and done means. First, we will establish a one-stop shop. One desk called the Rapid Resource Project Office. We'll handle all regulatory approvals across all levels of government so businesses don't have to waste time navigating through dozens of different agencies at 3 different levels of government. We will do this in partnership with provinces, First Nations, and municipalities, getting them to sign on to merging together their various processes. We will get rid of the double process right now where you have to do the exact same environmental review 3 different times for 3 different levels of government. We'll merge them together, one and done. Next, we will end duplication so there is only one application and review, ensuring efficiency without sacrificing standards. It's not about reducing our environmental or public safety protections. It's about merging them into one simplified step instead of overlapping processes. We did this during the great global recession of 08-09. Stephen Harper said we want 1-page application for municipal infrastructure, 1 environmental review. And guess what? We completed 23,500 projects from concept to completion in under 2 years, and the Environment Commissioner could not find a single problem with any of them affecting our ecology or our nature. So it can be done fast and safe. 3, I will guarantee decisions on major projects within a maximum of 1 year, but the target will be 6 months or sooner. No more delays, no more uncertainty, no more caps on Canadian growth and ambition. Ça suffit. On a besoin d'un nouveau
That's
gouvernement
enough. We need a new Conservative government with a plan to get projects built in order to unleash our resources, open up our economy, find new markets to make us less dependent on the United States for a change. The Conservative Party has a plan, and today I am announcing part of that plan. It's a simple and quick plan. My plan will make it possible to reduce paperwork and create jobs. First of all, I will create a one-stop shop, one office where people can go to get their projects approved by all levels of government. In other words, we will remove duplication when it comes to these approvals. I will remove that duplication, and thus there will be a single environmental review per project that will ensure that there is effectiveness without sacrificing environmental protection. There will be no overlapping processes, and thus the government will work with other levels of government to merge those processes into one. That is a request that has been made by Premier Legault, and I want to respect his approach. Also, any decisions with respect to these major projects will be made in 1 year at most, however, with a goal of having that done within 6 months. No more delays, no more uncertainty, no more limits on our economic development.
Have forgotten you, the people who want to work and create opportunities. They have anti-development laws like C-69, the industrial carbon tax, and the energy cap that will make sure no projects ever go ahead. That is why we cannot trust the Liberals to a 4th term in power. They have the same Liberal MPs, same Liberal advisors, same failed Liberal policies, same broken promises. Mark Carney is not real change. He is doubling down on the same lost Liberal decade from which we now need to escape with real change. The single most powerful thing we can do to break our dependence on the Americans and bring jobs and dollars home would be to rapidly expand our energy production and exports. But Mark Carney has said he wants to keep the industrial carbon tax, keep C-69, the no development law, keep the resource and energy cap. And get this, just a couple of days ago, after the Liberals saw my commitment to get LNG Canada Phase 2 built, they rushed out Minister Wilkinson to tell you that, surprise, now they've changed their position on that too. Except it comes with a big fast asterisk. The minister says, and I quote, "We'd like to see a positive decision, but the project would have to fit within the government's climate architecture." Their climate architecture. That is code for saying the project will never happen. Furthermore, the company who is investing in this project says they cannot do it with the energy cap, C-69, or the industrial carbon tax. So in other words, it would be impossible to complete LNG Canada if the Liberals stay in power, no matter what deathbed conversions or last-minute promises they now try to make. The Liberals are going to continue with the same failed approach. A resume is not a plan, nor is continuing with the same policies Mr. Carney advised Trudeau to take over the last 5 years. The last Conservative government, of which I was a part, had an economic action plan to grow the economy and make it less reliant on America. That's why Stephen Harper approved LNG Canada before the Liberals took office. And that's why I'm announcing today that I'm approving Phase 2 of LNG Canada. It will go ahead if I am elected, and we will make sure that it will be jobs for local people, including the great Haisla workers with whom our friend Ellis Ross has been working. We will also tap into the rich mining potential of northern BC to start economic boom for the region in gold, silver, copper, critical minerals, and increased refining and exporting capacity. We will learn from the success of LNG Canada on how we can get things built with First Nations and ensure that they enjoy prosperity. I will even allow the companies who build this project to pay a share of their federal corporate taxes directly to the First Nations in the area, creating own source revenue that will build schools, clean drinking water systems, hospitals, and other wonderful opportunities for the young people. This is on top of other projects that we will improve right across the country. In today's press release, you'll see that I've listed 10 projects that are trapped in the Liberal system waiting for an approval. I will rapidly approve them all, and I will invite many more to come to the fore. Ça inclut GNL Québec. On a besoin de
That
GNL
includes
Québec.
LNG Quebec. We need LNG Quebec in the Saguenay. We will put it forward, even if the Bloc and the Liberals oppose it.
Do we want a fourth Liberal term of keeping our resources in the ground and keeping Canada under America's thumb? Or do we want a new Conservative government that will approve projects, unlock resources, unleash our economy, so that we can be strong, self-reliant, sovereign, and stand on our own 2 feet against the Americans? Le choix qui s'offre aux Canadiens est
The choice in front of Canadians is simple. Do we want to give a fourth term to the Liberals who blocked the development of our resources and put our economy in a position of weakness in relation to the U.S.? Or do we want a new Conservative government that will unleash these projects and bring jobs to Canada so we can face up to the United States from a position of strength? That is the choice.
It's time to put Canada first for a change. That means partnering with First Nations, approving projects, expanding ports, building pipelines, digging mines, axing taxes, and getting it done for a change. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to questions. Please say your name and outlet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chuck Chang with the Canadian Press. Mr. Poilievre, how quickly do you think these fast-track programs can go ahead, considering that there's also provincial and municipal jurisdiction? And are you confident that the proper environmental and First Nation Indigenous consultations on these projects have been done in order to facilitate these fast tracks? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. I didn't get your name.
Chuck Chang, Canadian Press.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Yes, a very important question. My goal is to bring First Nations, municipalities, and provinces all under the same tent. Let's sit down and put together the checklist of all the things we need to approve, put it in one office that is accountable to all levels of government, and let the company then apply to the project right there. I'm convinced we can get these projects approved in as little as 6 months. We should be able to. That's what they do in other countries. Let me give you an example. In Germany, they built an LNG import terminal from concept to completion in 178 days. That's not the approval process. That was approval and construction. That's how things happen in the rest of the world. In Canada, we're in a parallel universe here, where it takes 14, 15 years to go through the bureaucracy. In the rest of the world, things are getting done in months, not years. And that's what we're going to have to do. We need to move at the speed of business to bring our jobs home and become self-reliant. Because after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, we can't afford a Liberal fourth term. We need a new Conservative government that will greenlight projects, axe taxes, and bring our jobs home for a change.
En français.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. I believe that we can get it done in 6 months, but at the most, 1 year. I think it's important to realize that around the world, these things move ahead quickly. The Germans bought an LNG export terminal in 178 days, and that includes both the approval and the construction. That's the way it works elsewhere. So waiting 14 years to get a permit is not normal. We will merge the different municipal and provincial and federal processes as well and put that as part of a one-stop shop so that we can approve them and get them built. Because after the lost Liberal decade, we cannot wait and give them another fourth term. We have to bring back jobs here, cut taxes, and develop projects under a new Conservative government for a change. Thank you.
We will now take a call-in question from the phone line.
Your next question is from Rob Shaw from Check News. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre. I'm sure, as you know, a big question about Phase 2 of LNG Canada is whether it should be forced to run on electricity to reduce pollution. And I take it, based on what you're saying today about your sort of pre-approval, you would not require electrification and it could just go ahead and run on natural gas. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. And to be clear, Mr. Shaw, the project will not go ahead if it cannot run on natural gas. It won't happen. So when the Liberals say that they're going to ban LNG Canada from using gas to power the plant, what they're saying is the plant will not be allowed to happen. And let's be very clear, if the Liberals are re-elected, this expansion will not occur for 4 reasons. 1, the energy cap that they are imposing makes it impossible. And you can ask the company about that. You don't have to take my word for it. 2, the industrial carbon tax. The only way LNG Canada #1 went ahead is because it had a carbon tax exemption. 3, C-69. Which will mean that it's 10 years of bureaucracy and hearings and back and forth that no company is going to waste millions and billions of dollars on. And 4, Liberals want to insist that it run on electricity and not on gas. That makes it impossible to finance. So for 4 reasons, there is no way the Liberals will ever allow this to happen. If you want energy independence, if you want these monstrous, big, beautiful projects to go ahead, you are going to need a change in government with a Canada First Conservative Prime Minister.
En français.
Oui, la réponse est oui.
Yes, the answer is yes. I will allow the project to go forward using natural gas. Without that decision, the project will never happen. It'll just be too costly. So if the Liberals are re-elected for a 4th term, this thing will never take place because there are 4 obstacles. They have put 4 barriers in place of this project. Number 1 is Bill C-69, the anti-development legislation that will block it. 2, the industrial carbon tax. The first phase of this project needed an exemption from that tax. 3, the energy cap. The company is saying that it would be impossible to move forward with the project with that cap in place. And 3, the requirement to use electricity for liquefaction. We need natural gas to do that. So it's a simple chase. Will you re-elect the Liberals to a 4th term to block this massive project? Or will you choose real change with a new Conservative government that will unleash this project and bring jobs to Canada?
Now go to another call-in question from the phone line.
Your next question is from Tom Fletcher from Northern Beat. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Canada is a little late to the party for LNG. We're behind Australia, Qatar, Indonesia, Malaysia, and of course the USA now. Can Canada still compete for more LNG on the West Coast or even on the East Coast?
Thank you, Mark Carney. Thank you, Justin Trudeau. Those two said there was no business case for LNG over the last decade. And as you correctly point out, all the other countries knew better. And in the state, during the time when the last lost Liberal decade, where Carney and Trudeau were blocking these projects here, we saw 8 new plants go up in the States. Qatar doubled its production and signed supply agreements with France. We've seen other countries unleash their natural gas potential. I understand now Alaska is looking at exporting LNG. So you're right. That is the lost Liberal decade. But no, we're not too late. There's still going to be massive demand for LNG because it is the cheapest, one of the cheapest and cleanest ways to power an electrical grid without coal. And so if we move now, if we reject a 4th Liberal term and elect a new Conservative government that will rapidly approve major projects like LNG Canada Part 2, LNG Quebec, and others, then we can get our gas to the world. We have huge advantages over the Americans. It takes 11 days to ship to Asia from BC. It takes 20 days to ship from the U.S. Gulf Coast. We have cold weather. It's nice and crisp out here today. That reduces the cost of liquefaction by 25%. Well, how do you liquefy a gas? You cool it down. We've already got a natural cooling system. It's called our climate. And also, we have abundant energy to power that liquefaction. So we have enormous advantages over the Americans, the Qataris, and countless others. We just need to get this Liberal government out of the way and elect a new Conservative government that will get it done for a change.
En français.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Trudeau,
Thank you
Mr.
very
Carney.
much. Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Carney blocked our opportunities for a decade while the Americans, the Qataris, the Australians, and others pursued those projects. So giving a 4th term to the same Liberals who blocked these projects is exactly the opposite of what we should do. Yes, we have a huge advantage here in Canada. We have a cold climate, making liquefaction cheaper. It takes 11 days to go from BC to Asia on a large ship, 20 to the United States. And we have an abundance of energy for liquefaction purposes, more than other countries. So we can do it more efficiently, cheaper than any other country in the world. We just need a change with a new Conservative government that will greenlight such projects.
We'll go to another question on the call-in line, and this will be the final question.
Thank you.
Your next question is from Marianne Dipolto from Franco Press. Please go ahead.
Bonjour, Monsieur Poilievre. Marianne Dipolto de
Mr. Poilievre, Franco Press.
Okay, this is the final question, and we'll continue to listen in and bring you a summary in just a moment. But let's take you now to Victoria, British Columbia, where the Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, is speaking at a campaign event. Let's listen in.
By disrupting the global economy, global financial markets, by directly targeting Canadian workers, and by fundamentally reshaping the international trading system. So many Canadians are understandably worried about their jobs and their retirement savings, which is why, anticipating this need, we announced this morning that we will help to protect Canadians' retirement savings from this market uncertainty. We will reduce the minimum amount that must be withdrawn from registered retirement income funds by 25% for the next year. And the benefit here is that seniors won't have to withdraw as much of their hard-earned savings when markets are volatile, as they will continue to be until this trade war is sorted out. We will also support seniors by temporarily boosting the guaranteed income supplement by 5%. Low-income seniors are amongst the groups that are most vulnerable during times of economic uncertainty, and market pressure. These people are on fixed incomes. They don't, in general, have the ability to work. And this boost will help them to weather the storm.
This is in addition to measures that we have already announced in support of workers. We have temporarily changed the rules, making employment insurance easier to access for workers who lose their jobs so that they won't have to wait a week before they can receive benefits. We have made employment insurance more accessible and more generous. And we are giving workers more time to find a job without losing their benefits. We have also taken action to support Canadian businesses. We have delayed their tax payments as well as their remittances of GST and HST from April 1st to the end of June, which will mean some $40 billion in liquidity that is being given to our Canadian businesses. We are also providing a new liquidity mechanism for businesses with also more funding for regional development agencies so that they can provide additional support to our businesses.
The third kind of sustainability is my principal topic for today, environmental sustainability. We are blessed in this country because we are rich in nature. People from all over the world come to visit BC, to visit Vancouver Island, to visit Canada, to enjoy the kind of view we have right here, right now. Although your view is somewhat better than my view, but that's okay. It's not bad. It's not bad, my view, but better that way. The natural beauty of our nation is stunning, and our natural heritage is virtually without equal around the world. Just as we Canadians care about our language, we care about our culture, we care for our natural world. As Canadians, nature is our nature. And this wisdom comes to us from Indigenous traditions. As Elder Duke Redbird says in his poem, The Power of the Land, in every nation, in every clan, the elders to a person, whether woman or a man, shared a common truth, one truth to understand, that the spirit of the people is equal to the power of the land.
Unfortunately, I think we must agree that we simply have not taken enough care of nature. In the course of my life, we have lost more than 70% of wild space, a strategy caused by the destruction of habitat and climate change.
Our natural capital, including biodiversity, has fallen 40% on a per capita basis, while at the same time, our produced capital has almost doubled in recent decades. In other words, we become twice as wealthy while impoverishing our natural world. This is what we mean when we talk about sustainability. No country can endlessly draw down on its nature to enrich itself. And now our natural heritage is facing a new threat. President Trump's unjustified tariffs come with threats to our sovereignty that have one goal behind them: to weaken Canada, to break us so that America can own us, to take our greatest strengths, our resources, our water, our land, our country. That will never happen. Canada is not America. America is a melting pot. Canada is a mosaic, because we value diversity. In America, healthcare is a big business. In Canada, it is a right, because we value solidarity. America is increasingly about the here and now. Canada is forward-looking and future-focused because we value sustainability. And that's why it was Canada who brought the world together and brokered the Montreal Protocol in the 1980s, which saved the ozone layer under Brian Mulroney. It's why Canada hosted COP15 2 years ago under Justin Trudeau, which led to landmark agreements on biodiversity and nature preservation. At the center of those agreements is a commitment to protect 30% of our lands and 30% of our waters by 2030. And why did we do this? Because we as Canadians value sustainability in all of its forms. We recognize that although we're not always perfect, we haven't always been perfect stewards of the land, we always strive to be good. And we strive to do things not because they're easy, but because they are right. We must earn our right to take from the environment while always respecting and nourishing it. And that's why a new Liberal government will pursue a bold new nature strategy with smart approaches to preserve our natural habitat and to use our finite financial resources to maximum impact. Pour ça, il faut tout d'abord identifier les endroits
we must begin by
où nous
identifying
pouvons
those
avoir
places
le plus grand impact.
where we can have the most impact.
Nous allons travailler avec les
We
provinces et
will work with the
territoires,
provinces and
les
territories,
experts et
experts,
les communautés autochtones,
and indigenous communities,
utiliser l'intelligence artificielle,
and use artificial intelligence and technology
la collecte de données sur le terrain,
and on-the-ground data collection in order to map those places that are environmentally fragile.
Nous aurons ainsi les données nécessaires
That
pour
way, we
atteindre
will have the
l'objectif de
necessary
cadre
data
mondial
to
de la
meet
biodiversité,
the targets of the World Biodiversity Framework and protect our water and land
2030.
by 2030, more quickly and at a lower cost.
In the past decade, we have expanded protected areas from 1% to 15%, and protected waters from 1% to just under 17%. We are making good progress. And to help get the rest of the way there, I'm announcing that a new Liberal government will move forward with 10 new national parks and marine conservation areas, along with creating 15 new national urban parks across Canada. At the same time, we will make national parks and historic sites free for all Canadians this upcoming summer. I know when I was growing up in Edmonton, Jasper National Park, Canada's crown jewel, in my opinion, I know we'll get some debate from behind me, maybe in front of me as well, but my crown jewel, Canada's crown jewel, Jasper National Park, was almost like a second home, and it's certainly where I made lasting memories. But creating new parks and making all our parks more accessible will help ensure that every Canadian will be able to experience the beauty of our great nation, just as I did. Now, to protect Canada's lands, our waters, and our wildlife, we must turn first to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leadership. Indigenous peoples are the first stewards of this land. And that's why my government will support Indigenous-led conservation projects and expand Indigenous Guardians programs to include Arctic Indigenous Guardians to safeguard our north. We will also reintroduce legislation at the first opportunity to enshrine First Nations' right to safe, clean, and reliable drinking water under law. Pour protéger la faune du Canada,
to protect Canadian wildlife, we will clean up our environment and put an end to trans-border commerce involving our wildlife. We will also fight the degradation of our oceans and our shorelines and work with industry to create more sustainable fisheries that are more environmentally friendly. The protection of our water resources The protection of our freshwater resources is also a priority. That's why we are taking steps to protect them by creating a new fund, a new strategic fund of $100 million for the use of technology to protect our freshwater. And we will make that one of our top trade priorities.
Now, crucially, our new plan recognizes one undeniable fact. Protecting nature and fighting climate change are intimately linked. Our soils, our oceans, our trees are the best stores of carbon that we have. In fact, nature-based solutions could get us, as a world, almost 1/3 of the way to reducing our emissions and helping to stave off the worst effects of climate change. And at the same time, on the other hand, climate change threatens to irreversibly harm our natural environment. Only by fighting climate change can we protect our natural environment. And only by protecting our natural environment can we protect ourselves, our planet, our future from the threat of climate change. So globally, Canada will work to establish international standards for voluntary carbon markets. That will allow those who choose to protect and conserve our environment in order to fight climate change to be compensated for doing so. We understand that values determine value. Canada intends to take a leadership role at the upcoming climate change conference in the Brazilian Amazon, where I know that nature-based solutions will be front and center. La nature.
Nature is at the very core of our identity as Canadians, and that's why that protection is a priority for our new Department of Canadian Culture and Identity. My government is making the protection of our land and water the primary responsibility of this new department.
You know, a young child wrote to me the other day that they, and I quote, dream of a Canada where there are many forests and lakes, and that we protect those forests, oceans, and lakes. And that student understands the assignment that we all share, that our environment is our responsibility, and our nature as Canadians is nature. We are Canada. We are Canada sustainable. We are Canada strong. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now begin the question period. We'll do 15 minutes to delegation and then a few questions from local. 15 minutes pour la délégation, ensuite les médias locaux. Michel?
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney.
Hello, Mr. Carney. Canadian press. What is the main message you are sending voters today, many of whom voted for the NDP in the last federal election in British Columbia? And are you making them a progressive promise not to cut social programs? Thank you for that question. First of all, with respect to the last part of your question, I have already done that. I have made that promise. We will never cut social programs, including health care, dental care, and all of those programs. There are quite a few of them, but we will not be cutting them under my government. That's the first thing. Second, with respect to this election, it's important to say that the major issue this time is fighting the U.S. threats. Who will represent Canada at the table?
The question, the second part of the question was about a commitment not to cut social programs. I gave an absolute commitment not to cut social programs. I gave a couple of examples. I won't take the whole time. I listed dental care, pharmacare, but I could list many more. We will not cut those. They are at the core of what we do. And I will say one other thing, which I didn't say in French, which is one of the reasons why we want to build a strong economy. We need a strong economy il faut avoir une économie forte afin d'avoir
we need a strong economy in order to fund social programs.
Last bit of the translation. unfortunately. But the reality is that the key issue in this election is who can stand up to the threats from America, to our sovereignty, to our nature, to our livelihoods, to our future. Who do you want at that negotiating table? Monsieur.
Markets are falling. You referred to this earlier. So what do you say to Canadians who are worried? Well, first of all, yes, the situation is a difficult one, and that must be said. But we have a strategy which is to fight the Americans in order to change those tariff policies brought in by the U.S. And we have made progress. We'll see what happens in a few weeks, but we have made progress. And the second part of that is to protect our workers and protect those people who have retired already with very specific initiatives with respect to people's savings. And finally, and this is fundamental, to rebuild our economy. We have to start doing that right now. Radio-Canada, Christian Noël. In British Columbia today, you are making an announcement on nature and the environment, but you also promised to build energy corridors and reduce the number of environmental reviews. Is that a contradiction? Well, first of all, I think we have to do a number of things at the same time as a government. Right now, in Quebec, there are people and businesses in Quebec that right now are using 350,000 barrels of oil day after day. And 70% of that oil comes from the United States. We have an opportunity now to displace that oil, if, but only if, we go through with impact assessments, and if everyone agrees, in other words, Quebec, the Indigenous peoples, and all the other provinces and the federal government. So that initiative of having one project and one review is necessary because we are comfortable with the environmental process in Quebec.
In English, we have to be able to do in government more than one thing at one time. We are moving to protect the environment. Announcement today, the focus of the question is on developments of conventional energy. I use the example of Quebec, which uses 350,000 on average barrels of oil a day, 70% of which comes from the United States. There is a big advantage to Canada to push that out, use our own oil, use the resources from that for other things, including protecting our environments, our social programs as well. But we will only do that in the case where we have the support of First Nations. We have the support of all the provinces, obviously including Quebec in the example that I gave. And with respect to environmental assessments, yes, we are open to having one project, one review to speed these projects of national interest, but that's because we have confidence in the environmental standards, in this case, of the province of Quebec. Monsieur.
En suivi, en quoi ça devrait rassurer les
Now,
électeurs
how
qui sont
should
pas
this reassure voters who are not necessarily in favor of that kind of project? And you're talking about accelerating the development of resources, and yet you want to continue to cap emissions. Is that compatible? Yes, it is compatible, because we need to reduce emissions, the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, when it comes to both transmission and production of oil and gas. At this time, That represents almost 30% of emissions across Canada. They come from Scope 1 and Scope 2. Conventional resources. So there need to be major projects such as the Pathways project, which involves carbon storage. So we have to do a number of things at the same time in order to ensure there's a proper energy transition and to build a strong, sustainable Canada.
In terms of, now I have to back up to my answer. In effect, the heart of this is how is it compatible to have both the development of conventional oil and have a transition? And part of the answer, and a cap on emissions. The answer is, look, we have almost 30% of our emissions in this country come from so-called Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions. In other words, in the production and transportation of oil and gas. This is an enormous figure. It's an unusually high figure relative to other countries, okay, in the production. We need to get those emissions down. We can get those emissions down with Canadian technology. The example and one of the great opportunities for Alberta, for Canada, ultimately for the world, is to advance carbon capture and storage. The principal opportunity there is in the Pathways project. That's how one reconciles is both producing more, which has the advantage of pushing out foreign supplies, makes Canada richer, pays for our social programs, gets good jobs, helps support our environment at the same time while using these gas. Mr. Aiken, please. Sorry. I know we're short on time. Sorry.
Okay, I'll be quick too.
Well, I'll try and be quick.
David Aiken, Global News. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to come back to the markets. Your investments are in a blind trust. You don't know how they're doing, but the rest of it.
They're going. I'm sure they're going down if they're.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wondered, you're a former Bank of Canada governor, former Bank of England governor. What do we make of this? What do businesses make of this? What can governments do, if anything?
Well, it's the key question. First off, I'll say I did speak to the governor of the Bank of Canada today. I spoke to the Minister of Finance. I spoke to a number of counterparts in the last 24 hours around the world, including as you know, Prime Minister Starmer. At present, let me say a few things and get to the heart of it. What you worry about in these types of situations, if you are charged with overseeing financial markets, are there problems that are being created by the markets themselves, the banks themselves? Are there weaknesses? We do not see that. We have rock solid financial institutions in this country, so they're not making it worse. Okay, so but what is happening in the markets is they are reacting to what we have warned about, which is that these tariffs are fundamentally damaging to the American economy and by extension to the global economy. So what needs to be done in a situation like this is, yes, there's a lot of technical things and liquidity and lots of work, that needs to be done to make sure the markets function and the markets don't make it worse. I have confidence in the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Minister of Finance, they're on top of it, and also have confidence in Canadian institutions. So Canadians can be reassured on that. But what you need to do in a crisis, and I have long experience in this, is you need to meet it with overwhelming force. You need to meet it with overwhelming force. And the situation at the heart of this is uncertainty about U.S. policy, or to make it worse, is greater certainty that U.S. policy will be self-harming to the American economy, and therefore the global economy, if the U.S. doesn't walk back from this tariff policy. We can't control the United States. We can't control President Trump's decision. We can speak, and we do, and influence, inform. We can control what we do here in this country, and that's why we're being clear about, and we've been clear from the start, in terms of the huge payback if we have one Canadian economy, not 13. The huge payback for major projects of national interest. The ability to catalyze investment in this country of all sorts, and the importance of diversifying our trading relationships around the world. And I will say in the last 48 hours, I've had a series of conversations around exactly, well, in fact, all of those aspects. Sorry, David, I'll hand back. But, so the way we need, and what Canadians, I think the core message to Canadians is something I've said over and again, but I want to really emphasize. We can give ourselves far more than the U.S. can take away. So the U.S. is driving itself into a recession, pressure on the world, if the U.S. doesn't change course. But what we can control is where we invest here, how we support our people, and that's what we're doing.
Interesting you mentioned about making sure markets work. You'll recall in the 08-09 fiscal crisis, you as governor took some steps to make sure that our banks were liquid. Prime Minister Harper took similar steps on fiscal policy. We came out of that recession faster, I think, than anybody else, right? Because of some of the steps that we're taking. This time around, first of all, do you anticipate Canada and or North America entering a recession? Has that likelihood increased? And 3, what steps might a government take to, like you did in 08-09, make sure we come out of that recession more rapidly?
Exactly the right question. In terms of, yes, the probability of a recession in the United States has gone up significantly. Something that we had warned about, and I take no joy in that it becoming more likely. That will have significant effects on the Canadian economy. It's very hard for us to avoid that area. That's part of the reason why in advance of this election we made the changes to EI to make it more generous. It's part of the reason why we made the changes to provide liquidity to Canadian companies so they're not pulling back unnecessarily. And I think that we're at a situation where those steps will help provide for companies the financing that's necessary in order to do. There's other things that can be done on the margin. What we're going to need to do, though, government, what Canadians will choose their government in a few weeks. My judgment, my government will act with force. We will accelerate major investments. We will provide very clear guidelines on where we're going to spend money, where the returns are going to be for the private sector, where we're going to take regulations away. I'll give you one example to make that tangible, David, but there are many more. We announced at the First Minister's meeting 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, just before calling the election, that we will remove all federal barriers to interprovincial trade, mobility, by Canada Day. We will table that legislation by Canada Day. We've left instructions for the officials to be developing that. We, as the Liberal Party, are developing that, and the first item of business, if we are returned, is going to be accelerating that, because that's the kind of certainty that you help to provide for business to make those investments. And Canada moves forward as Canada, not reading Truth Social and X and watching tweets down there. We'll take charge.
With respect to the risk of a recession in the United States, certainly it has increased, strongly increased. And that means that it will be difficult for Canada to avoid a recession if there is one in the United States. But we are masters in our own home. We control our economic destiny, and we have to take action with force. And my government will do that if we are elected.
Last question from the delegation before going to local media.
Yes, thank you.
Good morning, Nijuda Melissa, Globe and Mail. I'm wondering if you think sending out a carbon rebate when you've taken away the actual levy constitutes as an election goodie, and do you worry that voters will see it as a voting bribe?
No, it's a very well thought through thing, because what our commitment was from the start. It was a commitment I made during the leadership campaign, and then we followed through once I had been chosen and was Prime Minister. And our commitment was that we were going to make Canadians whole. So, well, Pierre Poilievre said axe the tax and never said anything about the rebate, didn't acknowledge that it exists, didn't acknowledge that more than 70% of Canadian households were coming out ahead of the combination of paying the consumer carbon tax and receiving the rebate. We recognized that they were coming out ahead. So we endeavor to make sure that having removed the tax, which gives money back, obviously, and we see it at the gas pump, but also making sure that the combination of the two makes sure that those families come out ahead. And so what we couldn't do in the 9 days of government is pass a tax cut. We've announced our intention for that middle-class tax cut. It's very clear, the $825 for two earning families, up to that. And that rebate bridges to the point at which, if we are elected, we will pass that tax cut. The numbers add up. It makes sure that those families come out ahead. So it's absolutely consistent with what I said effectively from January 15th when I launched my leadership campaign. It's the right thing to do, and that's why we did it.
Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, during his last speech at the Liberal Leadership Convention, said Liberals are progressives. You're here targeting NDP and Green ridings. I'm wondering, do you identify as a progressive? And if so, what does being a progressive mean to you?
Well, I believe in progress. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think we could make Canada, which is the greatest country in the world, even better. I recognize injustice that still exists in our society of all forms, and we need to strive every day to make progress on that. And I'll anchor it if I can in today's announcement. We need to do a much better job. We need to make progress in how we take care of our natural heritage for our children and grandchildren. But we can make progress, and the Liberal Party can do both things, which is to grow our economy, grow it for all Canadians, and make progress alongside, and that's what today's announcement is about.
Thank you. Over to local media. We got 5 minutes, so.
Okay.
Sure. The U.S. has announced its intention to raise softwood lumber duties.
Sure? I know you guys are from BC, but like, it's not, sorry, yes.
No worries. The U.S. has announced its intention to raise softwood lumber duties from 14.5% to 34.45%, which would be an enormous hit on an industry that is already struggling in BC with lowered supply and job losses. It's something the Premier says that he'll be talking to you about later today. What's your message to forestry workers in this province, and what do you plan to do in terms of supporting the industry and workers who are at this point worried about the feasibility of their jobs moving forward?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. And I start where you ended up, which is it starts with workers. It starts with workers and working back from workers, and our commitment in this trade battle, and our commitment more generally, is to support workers. These tariffs are wholly unjustified. They came through a USTR process, but they're wholly unjustified. And I recognize that there's 50,000 workers that are affected by this. I recognize the importance of this industry. I've known it my whole life, the importance of this industry and the contribution to this province and this country. So I am very focused on this issue. Premier Eby and I will be discussing specific measures that can be taken. We have made very clear that we will act. We have a strategy to fight, protect, and build. And we are fighting unjustified tariffs. This is another unjustified tariff. You can expect us to fight against it, and you can expect us to take specific steps to protect those workers. Last point, if I may, on building. And this will take some time, but this is fundamental. We announced a week ago today a new housing strategy for Canada, an intention to double the rate of house building to 500,000 homes a year, and anchoring that back into mass timber, Canadian lumber, Canadian solutions. So it takes time, and it won't fully replace a U.S. market. We're going to fight hard to get that access to U.S. market, but we also have to have the ambition, and we do have that ambition, to build in this country, to use our resources. Thank you.
Richard Zussman, Global BC. Welcome to British Columbia. What took you so long to come back? And also, you're meeting with Premier David Eby today. He is.
Didn't we just see each other like a few weeks ago? But yeah, okay.
Election. You've been in many other provinces, not British Columbia yet. You're here now.
I am. Thank you.
And it's beautiful, as always.
Yeah.
Premier Eby has been expressing concerns for months about the way equalization works. He says BC doesn't get its fair share, that we don't get major infrastructure funding from the federal government as we should for things like the Massey Tunnel. We're not getting the right amount of money to support immigration in this province, to support things like housing, to support the province to build schools and hospitals. Would your government consider looking at equalization and supporting provinces based on the burden they take when it comes to federal programs like immigration?
Thank you, Richard, for the question. I look forward to the meeting with Premier Eby, and we have regular discussions. So this is part of those discussions. I'm a huge believer in federalism, and I'd say the following. I start from results and work backwards from results. The major infrastructure here, developing this economy, ensuring that social safety net is adequately funded in British Columbia and all provinces and territories. I start from that, and then how do we best make that happen? I think some of the biggest impacts on infrastructure are going to be this focus on projects of national interest at this time of crisis. That's, to go back to Mr. Aiken's question about the economy, that's how we're going to have the biggest response here is to move those forwards rapidly. So there will be a series of things outside of equalization that are new and that are high impact that we'll look to work forward. But I'm always open, with respect to immigration, last point, they are, we have not lived up to our promise to those we brought to this country. We don't have the capacity in terms of housing, social services, and those who came as students, they're not all getting the education they deserve in Canada. We need to build that capacity. We need to manage immigration at lower levels for a period of time, until we have those results and the capacity. And of course, that means working very, very closely between the federal and provincial governments. Thank you.
We'll do a last question, please.
Yes.
Cindy Harnett with the Times Colonist, and we welcome you anytime. And so
thank you. I know.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre yesterday brought up the fact that BC is overwhelmed by the fentanyl crisis right now. He talked about putting more money into overdose or recovery, and he also talked about clamping down on overdose prevention sites, consumption sites, supervised sites, which are, of course, approved by the federal government. So if you can talk about, will those approvals continue under yourself? What is your plan, and will you talk about that with David Eby today?
I will talk about it with the Premier, not least because, the direct delivery of that is at a provincial, of those sites is on a provincial level. We are undergoing a review of the effectiveness of these. Again, I'm going to go back to results and whether or not this is the best mechanism going forward, or the best approach going forward. I will say this as well, which is that we are attacking the fentanyl crisis on multiple levels. It starts with source, the supply of fentanyl and its antecedents. 10,000 border agents, Black Hawk helicopters, drones, specific targeting of the cartels that are producing, a process that has been reducing the supply, at least the trans-border supply, quite significantly. It goes to working directly with the provinces on treatment. And it also goes to better supporting loved ones who are dealing with the horrors of addiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. C'est ce qui m'a fait notre presse conférence. C'est ce qui m'a this was an inter press conference. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. You guys okay? Are you going to send me out there? Can I?
You've been listening to the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, speaking in Victoria, British Columbia. This is his first campaign stop in BC since the campaign began. He has been there since becoming Prime Minister. He said that today he spoke with the Governor of the Bank of Canada, the Minister of Finance, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And what were some of the topics of discussion? What you're seeing on the right of your screen, which is another day of markets plunging because of the Donald Trump trade war inflicted on Canada and the rest of the world. He said we can't control the U.S., we can't control Trump's decision, but a recession in the U.S. is becoming increasingly likely, and that will have a major effect on the Canadian economy, saying that Canada could be put into a recession as well. He was asked if he was a progressive. He says, I believe in progress, and an injustice still lives in many parts of our society. He said, we need to make progress. He said, I believe in progress, and we need to make progress in how we take care of our natural heritage, which was part of the announcement in BC. The CBC's Kate McKenna joins me live from Ottawa. So, Kate, what's your key takeaway there?
Well, it was an announcement that was about nature and preservation and conservation, but it sort of got overshadowed with the thing that a lot of Canadians are very worried about right now, which is this market that's in chaos. And he kind of had a message of hope. I mean, he straight up said that this election, in his view, is about who is better to face off against the American threats and the changing American economy at this time, positioning himself as the best person for that job. But he also talked about some of the steps he would take if he's elected to sort of counter what's happening in the United States. And he kind of pointed to some of the things that they announced in his very brief time as Prime Minister before the election, where he talked about changes made to employment insurance, changes made to provide liquidity to Canadian businesses, and what he would do if elected, which is accelerate major investments. I mean, one of the big issues in this campaign so far has been about expediting energy projects, expediting what's being called nation-building projects to make Canada less reliant on the United States. He was asked about how he could balance both environmental needs and the needs for conventional fuel, specifically the topic of a potential pipeline that would run west to east. And he said, well, there are other ways to reduce emissions if we do that, or if we go that route. He was also asked about increased tariffs on softwood lumber set to take effect in a few weeks, an ongoing escalation in the trade war. And he had a message to forestry workers saying that these tariffs are unjustified. He understands that it's set to affect about 50,000 workers, but that he'll be speaking with Premier David Eby of British Columbia today, and that they can expect very specific steps to protect workers, and that a Liberal government, if elected, would build more homes. Of course, we've also heard that from the NDP. We've also heard that from the Conservatives, and that perhaps there's a role for Canadian lumber in that home building. Of course, that wouldn't make up for the amount of lumber that is used in the American market, but he was floating that as a potential partial solution to that problem.
And Kate, do you want to briefly tell us about the announcement today?
Yes. So this was about conservation. He said that a Liberal government would create at least 10 new national parks and marine conservation areas, as well as 15 new urban parks, would connect Canadians with nature by making access to national parks and historic sites free in the summer, spend another $100 million in Strategic Water Security Technology Fund to advance Canadian research and development, also more money for the disposal of ghost gear, of course, a problem in coastal communities, threatening marine mammals and birds, and also enshrine First Nations right to water into law. So those are all things that he announced today. He is in British Columbia on Vancouver Island trying to court those voters who are traditionally either orange or blue. He's trying to make some of those seats Liberal red.
Kate, thank you. The CBC's Kate McKenna live in Ottawa. We're taking you now to Toronto. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is speaking with reporters. Let's listen in.
Got a nice spot for you with good lighting.
Oh, good. Okay.
All right. So first of all, this tax break for the businesses, tax relief. Can you talk about that?
Well, we're just going to postpone people having to pay their taxes and take the burden off them, for companies, I should say, for about roughly 6 months, I believe.
Will this be a crunch for them when the 6 months is over? Like all of a sudden they'll owe a whole bunch of money?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think they have to put it into their operating cost. Any business does. They put the taxes to the side, and we'll be there to support them. And then WSIB as well. They're giving back over $2 billion. That's a total of $5 billion, which is very helpful.
You would rather see that $2 billion go to beefing up WSIB so it goes to workers rather than their employers? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we just gave $3 billion to workers, $200 rebate check to every Ontarian that filed their taxes. So, but we'll always be there to protect the people and their communities and their businesses. Let's hope that President Trump comes to some common sense here. The markets are tumbling again. Consumer confidence is down, inflation's happening, investment is stalled, and I'm thoroughly disappointed he's taken this avenue. But the people will speak down in the U.S. The markets are speaking, and hopefully he's going to listen. If not, they're going into a recession.
What's it going to mean for Ontario finances with the markets going down so much? What's that going to mean for Ontario finances?
Well, we're just going to continue creating opportunities and diversifying our trade around the world, attracting new investments. We had Vic Fideli over in Europe, getting some really good investments coming over here that we'll announce very shortly. We still see investments happening, but we have to create the environment and the conditions for companies to come here. And it's no different from what they're doing here at UHN, attracting some of the brightest minds anywhere in the world. But we can't attract the brightest minds in the world and the best companies at a 43% tax rate, a maximum. It just doesn't cut it. We have to create that climate and lower taxes, put money back into businesses' pockets and people's pockets, and people will come. We've proven it. It works. It's economics 101. So I just want to emphasize that message to our federal colleagues during this election.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Can you comment? Investments in Ontario doing? We had a big plant investment in Alliston, Ontario, also in St. Thomas. Are they still on the go, or are they on hold? Or
Yes, they're still on the go. I spoke to Ford as well. They're continuing their construction over in Oakville. We're seeing other investments coming here, not just in the auto sector, but in the life science sector. We have a big one coming up as well. So we're going to be out there working hard and creating the climate and the conditions for companies to come here and invest.
Are we going to see a provincial budget soon? Like,
oh yeah, it's coming.
Down the provincial budget? Like,
no, we're putting that provincial budget out, and Peter and Caroline will do a great job. But I got to get going, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone. That was the last question.
The court challenge to the safe injection sites.
Yeah, well, that's up to the courts. We believe that we're investing over $560 million to give people help, give them the opportunity, to give them shelter, to get them back on their feet, finding gainful employment for them. So, the heart hubs are 10 times better than the safe injection sites, and they support people, and it's 10 times more funding as well.
All right, thanks everyone. That was the last question.
Thank you.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Now, earlier, the Ontario Premier helped announce a new strategy that hospital executives are launching to attract top medical talent to Canada. So he was at one of the main hospitals in one of the main hospital networks in Toronto, and so he was wearing a jersey that was supportive of this initiative. This is a live shot of Washington, where the U.S. President and the Israeli Prime Minister are meeting this hour. Donald Trump will greet Benjamin Netanyahu here at the White House. The two will meet in the Oval Office. We will bring you some of that here on CBC News Network. We're also closely tracking the financial markets. Major stock indexes are falling again today after last week's two-day meltdown on both Bay Street and Wall Street. Much of this turbulence comes in response to the tariffs U.S. President Donald Trump imposed on about 90 countries last week as investors try to figure out what it means for the global economy. And the worst may be yet to come, as the highest tariff rates don't come into full effect until Wednesday. Our reporters are covering the story from both sides of the border. The CBC's Anis Sadari is in Calgary with a close-up look at the market numbers, and Katie Nicholson is in Washington, where we expect to hear from the president soon. But first, let's take a look at where the markets stand. And the CBC's Anis Sadari is looking into all of that for us, and he joins us live from Calgary. And Anis, I thought it was interesting. I was listening to the Liberal leader Mark Carney speaking earlier, and I've noticed a change. He's saying his language is looking increasingly likely that the U.S. is going to go into a recession. That's going to have a major effect on Canada, and if there's a recession in the United States, there could be one here in Canada too. Sort of the tone has changed. Walk us through the latest rough ride on the markets.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about recessions, that has a very specific definition. So what's happening with the markets, it can be a hint or a predictor of a recession. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is one right now, but certainly what's been happening with the markets over the last few business days has people saying that R word a lot more, recession, because we've seen big drops on Thursday, big drops again on Friday. And then today, it started out with a big drop on both the New York Stock Exchange and the Toronto Stock Exchange. And then we've seen both of them sort of go up and down like this, have had some bumps. So right now, when we look at the New York Stock Exchange, down just a little bit over 1.25 points, down 1.25 right now. The Toronto Stock Exchange, we're looking at drops there as well. It's been fluctuating. So as you're hearing market analysts talk about what's happening, not just on these two markets, but on the NASDAQ as well, or on the S&P 500, which is a measure of several American stocks, you might be hearing people say like, oh, there's been a bounce back and then a drop back down. We have not seen any of these markets recover the losses that they took on Thursday and Friday. So really what we're seeing today is more drops, and then when there's a bounce, it might bounce slightly up and then drop again, but we're not seeing any recovery of what's been happening over the last few days. Clearly, investors, whether that is retail investors or big investors like hedge funds, mutual funds, banks, the people who have money in these markets are looking ahead to the future and they're saying, we don't think we're going to make as much money, and they're pulling their money out. That hasn't changed, regardless of what we're seeing in terms of those bounces.
Yeah, 3 days in a row. And Anise, we expected the blowback from Trump's tariffs announcements would be felt on Thursday. This was the day after so-called Liberation Day. Then we saw a significant fall on Friday. And then as we were waking up, we noticed basically a bloodbath in Asia and then Europe. Why are we continuing to see the markets decline today?
Yeah, I mean, usually when something big happens in the middle of the week, the markets will react to it fairly quickly. And, you know, they may not bounce back, but we won't see continued drops over and over again. And it's almost as if the markets keep getting brand new information even when they aren't. We talked to an economist earlier today here in Calgary about this. Here's what he had to say.
What everyone's doing is trying to adjust to this new reality. And then selling off stocks to say until they get further notice. And I think that's the key thing here is it's all about duration. If we see signs that maybe Trump is going to negotiate and move off this tariff plan, then we could see the market bounce back. But right now, the investors don't have that certainty right now to be confident.
So confidence is really what it's about there. You hear him say that markets and market investors are waiting for them to have something that they can be confident in, and that's why we keep seeing these drops over the course of repeated days. It seems like many players are not confident that anything is going to change, and the policies announced on Wednesday, and then the counter policies announced from, let's say, China, but not only China, announced on Thursday. They're not confident that those are going to go away at any time soon, and so they will keep losing money in that case. And that seems to be what we're hearing from people like Donald Trump. Take a look at what he posted on Truth Social, which is his sort of X-style, Twitter-style social media website, where he said basically, things are down, oil prices are down, markets are down, and he's not changing his mind. I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but he's basically implying, at least, that his policies are here to stay. He's considering that there is no inflation right now, or he's saying there is no inflation right now. I will tell you, Andrew, that economists are going to disagree with him. The tariffs are predicted to cause inflation. Many of the things that we are seeing happening in the markets right now are harbingers of inflation and, you know, going back to what you first asked there, potentially a recession. But of course, we aren't there yet. We have to see what the political developments are.
Anise, thank you. The CBC's Anise Hadari live in Calgary. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just arrived at the White House. Netanyahu and Donald Trump were scheduled to hold a joint press conference following a bilateral meeting, but it appears that's now been abruptly called off. The CBC's Katie Nicholson joins me now live from Washington. So, Katie, what do we know?
Well, as you say, that that press conference that was scheduled for 2:30 had been on the agenda this morning, has been scrubbed, but it appears there is reporting that there will be some sort of an interaction in the Oval Office, and that tape will turn around a little bit later in the day. So just that press conference itself seems to be off the table, a live press conference, but something else coming perhaps from the Oval Office a little bit later. Of course, one of the things that they're expected to talk about is tariffs. Israel is one of those friendly nations to the U.S. that was hit by one of those reciprocal tariffs, 17%, and that has had quite an impact. Israel is, the U.S. is Israel's largest single trading partner. So if you think about it, that 17% is going to represent quite a number, quite a hit to their economy. The Times of Israel says back in 2024, just last year, the U.S. imported more than $13.5 billion worth of goods to Israel. So there's a number of markets, of sectors that are affected by this within Israel, particularly nervous right now: biotech, robotics, electronic components, that sort of thing. But obviously, we're talking about Israel, so tariffs are not going to be the only thing on the table here. Per the White House agenda that was put out this morning, there's going to be discussions around Iranian nuclear and regional activities. So, of course, these two countries really differ on what the solutions are to curtail Iran's nuclear program. Israel is a fan of military intervention. Trump is inclined more to strike some sort of a deal toward diplomacy here. The situation in Gaza, including the ongoing hostage concerns, and, of course, those sort of fraying Israeli-Turkey relations, especially over both nations' influence over Syria. But what is going to be interesting to watch is how this sort of plays out within the world of this sort of tariff hanging over them. There is no getting away from the markets. Every story is almost tied to it right now, right? So how will this sort of tariff burden be used as a tool for American leverage, even over a friendly country?
So ahead of his meeting with Netanyahu, President Trump was threatening additional tariffs on China. Take us through what's been happening.
Yeah, so this was just before the president met with the Dodgers at the White House to celebrate their World Series win. He basically is playing a little hardball of his own, significantly heightening that trade war on China with a post on Truth Social. Here it is. And really, this is a pushback against those retaliatory measures China introduced. Here's what it says. If China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, April 8th, 2025, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. So that's Wednesday. Additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. And negotiations with other countries, which have also been requested meetings, they'll be taking place immediately. So really worth noting, last night on Air Force One, when the president spoke to reporters, he repeatedly brought up trade grievances with China. At the same time, China has really sort of been pushing back, right? It's been projecting confidence that it can weather a trade war with the U.S., given all of the trade barriers that it has been dealing with for over a decade. And it's really used combative and critical language around these tariffs. So really interesting. We'll be watching to see how China responds to this latest threat. And all this while, as Donald Trump is doubling down, others in the mega and finance world are actually urging him to back off a little. So enter Bill Ackman. He's a hedge fund billionaire. He is a proud MAGA supporter. So it's really notable when he took to X yesterday in a very long post to really urge the president to put a 90-day pause on these tariffs. Here's a little bit of what he posted. He says, the president has the opportunity to call a 90-day timeout, negotiate and resolve unfair asymmetric tariff deals and induce trillions of dollars of new investment in our country. If, on the other hand, on April 9th, we launch economic nuclear war on every country in the world, business investment will grind to a halt. He does go on to say that without changing course, the U.S. is heading into a, quote, self-induced economic nuclear winter. So the White House has really been pushing against these comments, saying they're hyperbolic. A lot of the narrative that the White House has been sort of pushing back against, their idea is, oh, well, it's the media making too much of this market drop. But this isn't, right, the media. This is a mega billionaire, a Trump supporter, who is saying this. This morning, White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett went on Fox and Friends, and he was pushing back against those words from Ackman. Here is Hassett.
I would urge everyone, especially Bill, to ease off the rhetoric a little bit. A lot of us at the White House think that these economic responses are exaggerated by critics. Even if you think that there will be some negative effect from the trade side, that's still a small share of GDP. And so the idea that it's going to be a nuclear winter or something like that is completely irresponsible rhetoric.
Now, the markets fluttered a bit after this interview. That is because part of that interview on Fox was taken out of context and more or less suggested that Hassett was saying that the Trump administration was thinking about taking Ackman up on that suggestion. There'd be a 90-day tariff pause. So the markets swung again. Then the White House put out a statement saying absolutely not. They called it fake news. There will be no 90-day pause. So we can sort of see how volatile everything is, and just how a simple comment taken out of context like that, there was such a quick reaction. So even though the story was killed, it was as the White House would say, false news. It was there was no merit to it. You can see how quickly the markets reacted in this moment, and there's almost a sense of desperation at play, right?
Katie, thank you. The CBC's Katie Nicholson live in Washington. Canada is now challenging auto tariffs at the World Trade Organization. It's claiming the import taxes break with what the U.S. accepted in a 1994 trade deal. And Canada's softwood lumber industry is facing a steep hike in U.S. import taxes, too. U.S. duties are reportedly expected to more than double, jumping from just over 14.5% to over 34%. The U.S. buys about half of the softwood lumber that Canada produces. It's a $10 billion industry and a vital part of BC's economy. You're watching CBC News Network. The uncertainty caused by Donald Trump's tariffs is having a big impact on how people do business. In many cases, it's forcing them to adapt on the fly. The CBC's Aaron Collins has traveled to Medicine Hat, Alberta, where people are looking for opportunities from the chaos, and he joins me now live. Aaron, so you've been speaking to businesses about how they're responding to these strained relations with the U.S. What struck you?
Hey, Andrew, that's right. Yeah, I have. We spent a couple days here in Medicine Hat just going around and seeing what the reaction here on the ground was from the local business community. And I mean, not unlike anywhere in the country, I think the general consensus is they would wish this wasn't happening, right? But rather than focusing on the problem, the chaos and the uncertainty that's related with the U.S.-Canada relations right now, they're trying to focus on potential silver linings, potential upsides, things that they might be able to do to make things a little bit better. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. We went to a couple local brewers in town, and of course they're real popular here in town, but they have a trouble getting across the border into Saskatchewan or into British Columbia to sell their product. They're hoping trouble with the U.S. means some of those interprovincial trade barriers that we've been hearing about maybe coming down. Well, if those came down, that would be good for the local brewers. That's one example I'll share with you. Another one, this is a greenhouse capital of this part of the world, and a lot of the fruit and veg that winds up in local stores here comes from greenhouses in this area. Those folks are seeing a big uptick in that sort of Buy Canadian movement, which they think is an opportunity to corner even more of that market. So have a listen to what Ryan Kramer from Big Marble Farms has to say about that opportunity.
There's been a push for buying local and buying Canadian for a long time, but this certainly what's happened recently has increased that push. So we're looking at it that way. We're trying to see it as a silver lining thing, right? That people are going to be more focused on keeping product in Canada and supporting local.
So the focus on finding that silver lining, at least in this part of the world, Andrew.
And so where do you think that economic resilience and that diversity comes from in that part of the world? Where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? It's certainly the question that I had while I was talking to people here, and I think, at least something that I heard from a lot of people, is it comes from the history of this part of the world, right? So if you locate yourself where we are in Medicine Hat, this area is part of what's called the Palliser Triangle, which, you know, I didn't know a lot about before I got here, but essentially what it is this arid section of North America. And when the prospectors, the settlers came out here, 100 and some odd years ago, they were pretty much told this place is too dry to settle. Move on, keep going. They didn't. They stayed, they stuck it out, and they got used to that sort of chaotic and uncertain relationship with their economy, whether they were ranching or they were farming. There were bad years. And then, of course, after that, you had the natural gas sector, which had its own share of booms and busts. So they're used to that kind of chaos, and they're used to managing it, Andrew.
Interesting. And now that we're in an election period, what do you think people there are looking for?
I think they want more investment, more support from the federal government in the industries that matter here. I mentioned a couple examples there, the local brewers. There's lots and lots of industry here, ranchers and farmers, the greenhouses. Another thing that you might not know about this part of the world is this is a huge part of Canada's aerospace sector. They make drones here, and they make drones for the defense sector. So I spoke with Spencer Fraser. He runs a company here in town called Landing Zones that make drones. He'd like to see more investment in the aerospace sector here in Medicine Hat. Have a listen.
Talking a lot of money here. We're talking, in some years, $300-400 million worth of business that's going outside of Canada instead of where we could be doing it right here at home. Yeah. So, we're hoping to see common sense prevail, that people will say, hey, we can do this in our own backyard, give jobs to Canadians, help the tech evolve, and then continue with our exports.
So again, Andrew, you're hearing about people looking at an uncertain future, but trying to figure a way forward. And, you can't help but being impressed with the optimism that you do see out here.
That is impressive to hear. All right, Aaron, thank you. The CBC's Aaron Collins in Medicine Hat, Alberta. And Medicine Hat will also be the focus tonight and tomorrow for the National. Adrian Arsenault will host the program from there as part of a roadshow series connecting with voters. You can watch it at 9 p.m. Eastern on CBC News Network and 10 p.m. local on CBC Television, 10:30 in Newfoundland. We're back in a moment. In Quebec, the trial of a man accused of killing 2 children and injuring 6 others has begun today in Laval. The transit bus he was driving crashed into a daycare in February 2023. The 53-year-old faces several charges, including second-degree murder and assault with a weapon. The CBC's Sarah Levitt is following the story, and she joins us now live from Montreal. So, Sarah, what more can you tell us about this case and what's happening in court today?
Well, Andrew, it was a really emotional morning in the courtroom because evidence was shown, video evidence, remarkable evidence showing the bus driver driving into the daycare. Quite, as I said, emotional for those in attendance. And among those in attendance are parents of some of the kids that were killed and injured, and other parents of kids who went to this daycare. And they said it brought them back to February 2023. Now, Pierre Ni Saint-Amand is the man accused and on trial. He's facing 2 counts of second-degree murder as well as other lesser charges. Today, he pleaded not guilty. But here's what's interesting about this case. Now, it's been 2 years since that event, and it's taken this long because there's been preliminary evidence given. And in particular here, the Crown and the defense are in agreement, and they're before a judge, not a jury. They believe that Saint-Amand should be found not criminally responsible for what happened on that day. The difference being here, the Crown asking that he be labeled a high-risk offender. So now it's up to the judge in this week, as this hearing goes on, to decide whether or not this man should be declared not criminally responsible.
There are some parents in court today. Tell us about their reaction to all that has happened.
Well, Andrew, there was audible gasps when the videos were played of what was happening. Of course, there are restrictions. We watched the videos without sound, given just what happened on that day. Lots of people in tears. And a lot of the parents are really unhappy with how this is all played out. The fact that both the Crown and the defense are hoping for a not criminally responsible result here. They think that that's absolutely insane, is one of the words that one of the parents used. They said that this isn't justice. And they said of watching the video today, it brought them right back to the panic. And, you know, Andrew, I was there that day. I arrived soon after it happened, when I saw parents running to where their kids were held in the hopes of finding out news about what had happened. Let's hear from one father whose son was injured that day.
During a few days ago, I tried to imagine what I will saw, and today it was awful. It was very difficult. It's a big drama.
So this afternoon, the court will be hearing more evidence. There will also be testimony from psychiatrists, both from the Crown and the defense, and this trial is expected to go on for the next few days.
Sarah, thank you. The CBC's Sarah Levitt, live in Montreal.